Thunder Sonia was dead. The killer belonged to the human royal family. The engagement between Nemesia, the little elven magician, and Ferdinand, son of the human chancellor, had been annulled, and relations between humans and elves had suddenly grown extremely tense. At that time, the two nations were locked in a constant standoff along their shared border. That information had reached the Beastmen Kingdom only a couple of months earlier. Shortly after, demons had risen in arms. They began gathering troops near the border between the demon country and the Beastmen nation. Beastmen reacted swiftly. In less than 3 days, they had assembled in the border zone an army 3 times the size of the enemies. They had been preparing for this moment for a long time, ever since the day their sacred tree had withered. They knew that, sooner or later, demons or succubi would attempt an invasion, so they had abandoned all attempts at disarmament and devoted themselves entirely to strengthening their military. That decision could easily have drawn criticism from other nations, but the incidents that had occurred in the Blackhead territory had fully justified their actions. Moreover, neither elves nor humans, those who would have been the first to protest, showed any sign of wanting to scale down their forces anymore. On the contrary, both kingdoms seemed to be on the brink of war with one another, which made their readiness for battle clear. The most influential families had even arranged marriages among their children in preparation for the demons' eventual uprising. The human diplomats had voiced complaints, but their protests were far weaker than usual. Dwarves, of course, had said nothing. They were thriving by selling weapons to all 3 kingdoms. The Beastmen Kingdom had been waiting for this moment, the moment when demons would rise. They had never underestimated them, even though their power had waned after being driven northward. They had prepared thoroughly, ensuring that they could concentrate their forces at the border the instant it became necessary. If they had been elves or humans, they might have devised some cunning pretext to provoke demons and force them to rebel. But Beastmen were a race that knew how to wait. They had even requested reinforcements from elves and humans, aiming to be fully prepared. However, that request had proved impossible to fulfill due to the conflict between the 2 nations, which had begun with Thunder Sonia's death. Demons and Beastmen, 2 armies now stood face to face, separated only by the border. At first glance, the outcome already seemed decided. The demon army looked weak, so much so that it was hard to believe Gedigas had truly been resurrected to lead them. Their equipment was so poor it couldn't even be compared to that of the demons of old. They looked like an army staging their final, desperate stand before annihilation. In contrast, the Beastmen nation had deployed 5 of its 6 princesses, all except the 3rd princess, Inula. Militarily, that meant the entire army was gathered there, save for the royal guard under Queen Leone's command and a few units watching the ogre border. Each princess commanded her own division, and all awaited the start of the war eagerly, ready to tear apart the demon army. Although the difference in power was so overwhelming it could almost be called a mere hunt, Beastmen knew that, when it came to demons, even a hunt had to be treated with the utmost seriousness. Deep in the heart of the Beastmen nation was carved the unshakable fear that demons remained a true threat, even in their apparent weakness. Even so, it was undeniable that everyone felt a certain joy at finally being able to take revenge on the beings who had withered their sacred tree. The 5 princesses were determined to crush them, to eradicate the demons without leaving a single trace behind. The overwhelming difference in strength and their level of preparation gave them full confidence in victory. However, not all of them, deep in their hearts, were entirely convinced. Dearest sister. Inside the War Council chamber, the 5 Beastmen princesses were gathered, 1st Princess Lisa, 2nd Princess Rubina, 4th Princess Quina, 6th Princess Fleural, and 5th Princess Sylviana. The one who had raised her voice to the 1st princess was Sylviana, who had just been released from house arrest and was now allowed to take part in the imminent battle. You have the floor, Sylviana. I don't believe Gedigas would have started this war without some chance of victory. I think we should refrain from attacking until we understand his plan. I see. Had there been others present, they might have branded her a coward. But the history of the Beastmen nation was filled with battles against armies commanded by Gedigas, and in nearly all of them, they had been defeated. They had achieved victory only once, at the Battle of the Lemium Highlands, and even then, it had come at an enormous cost. The hero Leto had led a suicide squad to sever the enemy's head, defeating Gedigas through assassination rather than any true battlefield triumph. As long as Gedigas had lived, Beastmen had never once managed to defeat him in direct combat. Every victory they had claimed afterward had occurred only after his death. However, interjected 2nd Princess Rubina. It could also be interpreted that Gedigas failed to see all his plans through to completion. Rubina, destined to serve as advisor to Lisa, the future queen, believed it was her duty to always provide a contrary opinion to her sister. He did succeed in turning elves and humans against each other, that much is true. But he failed to weaken our forces, and now he must face the full might of the Beastmen nation with only a small army. It's possible, then, that when we meet him in battle, we may win with little difficulty. That's far too optimistic. Not even Gadigas could make everything go according to his will. His death at the hands of the assassination squad in the past was proof of that. Demons had been driven into the frozen fields of the north and were now on the brink of extinction. There had been no reports of them gathering supplies or weapons. That they would now step onto the battlefield after Gadigas' resurrection, as a final desperate act before perishing, would surprise no one. Even so, they lacked information. Caution was only natural, all those present had been born during the war. Queen Leone had given birth to them while Beastmen were on the run, half dead. Their earliest memories were of the series of defeats at Gadigas' hands. Of course, as Sylviana had said, if he was here, Gadigas must be plotting something. He was not a man who would start a battle without at least some chance of success. Even so, Lisa made her decision. With such a difference in strength, we cannot allow ourselves to panic. Although they harbored the unease that it might be a trap, they did not choose to withdraw. The imbalance was obvious and, in theory, victory seemed certain. Besides, if demons so much as advanced a step, they would be treading on Beastman land, their territory would be profaned. If they had wanted to maximize the certainty of success, they might have waited for reinforcements from the dwarves. Elves and humans probably would not come, even though they had been consulted. They too had been preparing for Gadigas, perhaps, even amid a face-off, they might send auxiliaries. But there was no reason to wait for external forces that might never arrive. They did not underestimate Gadigas, in fact, precisely because they did not, they had deployed nearly all their strength. For Beastmen, there was no reason to fall back. Hostilities began with Gadigas' declaration of war. After the war ended, the atrocities of the four-race alliance became intolerable. Demons were stripped of the means to live and driven down the road to extinction. Peace and concord were asked in the name of mutual tranquility. I am Gadigas, the Demon King. For the survival of my people, I declare war on the Beastman nation. The Beastman soldiers heard him and showed fierce smiles. Those 4 years had filled them with rancor. To resurrect Gadigas they had withered their sacred tree, their spiritual pillar. That was why they swore that this time they would eradicate the demons once and for all. All forces, forward! The battle opened calmly. Demons had 10,000 troops, Beastmen, 30,000. A deep gorge yawned between the two armies. The river below ran swift, even burly orcs would have been swept away easily. The only practicable approach was the fortress that also served as a checkpoint. That garrison, once held by humans, had been taken by Beastmen and converted into a crude fortification. Of course, the entire Beastman army could not fit inside, but the building on the bridge, the only existing crossing, would prove extremely useful. In that case, the demons' initial problem was how to take that fortress. However, the bridge leading to it was too narrow to assault with the whole army. Thus the Beastman plan was to use the fortress while it stood to inflict maximum damage on demons and, when resistance became untenable, to destroy the fortress and, if necessary, the bridge, dealing a devastating blow while blocking their advance. Of course, if demons abandoned the effort to seize the fortress and retreated, Beastmen would sally forth from it, pursue, and exterminate them completely. But demons did not adopt that tactic. First, they ignored the fortress, then they split their 10,000 troops into 3 groups and moved them to both sides of the cliff. Once out of range of the fortress's attacks, they conjured large-scale magic and erected improvised stone bridges on both flanks, from which they launched their offensive. Beastmen responded immediately. They had anticipated such a move. So, leaving part of their forces inside the fortress, they divided their army and prepared to intercept the enemies who crossed the newly raised stone bridges. Beastmen were skilled at forming small hunting parties that coordinated organically to strike. The size of each pack was not fixed, it varied with the situation, rotating constantly. Sometimes 2, sometimes up to 10. To an outsider their style might appear chaotic, but the internal hierarchy was clear, each group had a leader, and when that leader fell, the next in rank immediately assumed command to continue the fight. They did not move with the strict discipline of humans, yet their ability to assess and react instantly on the battlefield was astonishing, and they were especially adept at countering surprise tactics. In a situation like that, where they held numerical superiority, Beastmen proved themselves to be natural-born strategists, they cornered their enemies without taking losses, responded swiftly to sudden counterattacks, and displayed enough flexibility to neutralize them. The Beastmen race was, in essence, a race of hunters of great skill. The demons who had crossed the stone bridges began to be hunted down one after another. Even so, they managed to hold their ground without retreating, maintaining their positions at the end of the bridge, a feat worthy of their reputation and their race. After all, they had once led the ancient Seven Races Federation. Despite being outnumbered, their morale was high, and at key points along the front they even managed to overpower Beastmen. However, at best, both sides were evenly matched. And when forces were evenly matched, the advantage always fell to the army with greater numbers. This is our chance. 4th Division, advance! At Lisa's roar, the troops charged out from the central fortress. The bridge was narrow, so they could not all move at once, but against the roughly 4,000 enemies ahead, their numerical advantage would be enough to crush them. If they could defeat Gadigas himself in the center, it would become a replay of the Battle of the Lemium Highlands. In other words, it would mean victory. To split an already reduced army is the height of stupidity. The 6th Princess, Fleural, shouted as she led the troops that had departed from the fortress. Gadigas hasn't resurrected. Some fool must be impersonating him. That was what she thought. Gadigas would never have conceived such an absurd strategy. Not even the Dark General sequence would have done something like that. Therefore, it was surely some nameless demon who had incited the others by invoking Gadigas' name. An impostor. Even if that Gadigas was false, her swordsmanship was not. Fleural intended to show him the true technique she had learned from the hero Leto. The first to notice it was the subordinate among Fleural's men with the keenest sense of smell. The it he had scented was death. Not the ordinary death of the battlefield, where corpses piled up, but something different, older, a primordial death. It was impossible to describe that smell in words, especially since there was nothing like it in the world. That was why the Beastmen did not attempt to explain it, they conveyed their instinct through gestures and howls. He sounded the alarm with that howl. Death is coming, it said. And just as his cry echoed, something slowly rose among the demon ranks. Only then did Fleural see it with her own eyes. Wah, what is that? She had never seen anything like it. She could not even have imagined it. But even without understanding what it was, she knew immediately. She could not grasp its nature, but her instinct recognized the presence of a being that awakened an ancient fear, something that could not be defeated. Ah! The fur all over her body bristled, and terror froze her legs. Even so, her will to advance did not falter, perhaps it was the pride of her lineage as a beast woman. Fleural did not back down. Advance! The frustration that had built up from being unable to retaliate against demons after the loss of the sacred tree made them forget the very meaning of the word retreat. And then, that thing began to unleash its fury. The 6th Princess of the Beastmen Kingdom, Fleural, fell in battle. When Fleural died, the Beastmen headquarters still had no grasp of the situation. Reports had come in that something had appeared at the demon's command post, but they never imagined that it possessed the power to annihilate in an instant the entire 4th Division led by Fleural. This was because neither the messengers nor anyone else understood what it actually was. By the time they realized, that thing had already reached the central fortress, and in the blink of an eye, reduced it to rubble. From the center, the unharmed demons began pouring toward their lines. The moment the 5th Princess, Sylviana, saw the creature that had destroyed the fortress, she immediately advised the Commander-in-Chief, Lisa. We must retreat. In her mind surfaced the memory of an incident that had occurred barely half a year earlier, the appearance of an unknown monster that had attacked the Blackhead territory. Though the creature now ravaging the Beastmen forces had a very different form, its presence and size were strikingly similar. Sylviana knew all too well that facing an enemy of such magnitude required special preparation. There were no ballistae here, nor any heroes capable of confronting it. Perhaps, given the right preparation, the bravest of the 6 princesses, the 6th Princess Fleural, a master of close combat, might have been able to fight it. But it was already too late. She was dead. There was no longer any way to win. Lisa hesitated. Even after losing the 4th Division under Fleural's command, her army still outnumbered the enemy. It was precisely because she did not understand the nature of the foe that she could think that way. Right now, we have no means to defeat that monster. I propose we retreat for the time being, regroup, and face them again once we're prepared. Sylviana maintained her composure. Inside, she was terrified, but she knew that if she let her anxiety show, her sister before her might take it as cowardice and reject her suggestion. Lisa understood. Understood. We'll withdraw. Send messengers to Rubina and Quina. Orders were sent to the two armies holding the right and left wings, containing the enemy. That day, the Beastman army suffered a devastating blow and was forced to flee. They lost half of their 30,000 soldiers, and the fourth princess, Quina, who had stayed behind to cover the retreat, fell in battle. Flural and Quina. In a single day, Beastmen had lost 15,000 soldiers and 2 of their princesses. That is all. When the first Princess Lisa appeared before the queen, her body was covered in wounds. During the retreat, the headquarters had been ambushed. In that attack, she had sustained a deep wound across her face, her arm had been broken, and her tail had been cut halfway through. Even so, without letting the strength fade from her eyes, she finished reporting the defeat. Upon receiving the report, the Beastman Queen, Leon River, slumped silently in her throne. She had suddenly lost 2 of her beloved daughters, and despite all precautions the enemy had outmatched them and defeated them. She felt deep sorrow. Between sobs she wondered if there had been anything more she could have done. But that regret did not last long. She was a wartime queen. This was not the first time she had lost children or suffered defeat. Her consort had died long ago, and age had caught up with her. She could not expect more offspring, but it was not the end. They had not yet been annihilated. Well done. You have returned alive, Leon said. In a matter of seconds she had recovered her composure. First she offered a few words of recognition to her daughter, then paused to take a deep breath. Sylviana. Yes. The strategist who accompanied the first princess, still sweating from the wounds suffered during the ambush on headquarters, nodded with a grave expression. How do you assess the situation? We cannot win. We must withdraw. This place was the Red Forest, the Beastmen's sacred land and their main stronghold. In theory it was a place they should never abandon. Where would we go? We should turn to the elves. Why? Because my sister, Inula, is there. She had never imagined things would come to this. But precisely for such an eventuality everything had been prepared in advance. The marriage alliance between the Beastman royal family and the elves existed for this purpose. Even now, Beastmen were not thinking of surrender. Elves would hold out to the end. That long-lived race considered itself wise, but it lacked flexibility. They were not like humans or dwarves, who might even betray their own when convenient. Elves would never abandon their people, probably because the being who had protected them for so long had been of that same kind. There was a time when I fled, only to ensure our race's survival. Yes. I've been told I was born during that period. And you, on the other hand, believe we should fight, do you not? That we should take refuge with elves and resist together. So long as there is a chance of victory. Hearing that firm reply from her daughter, Leon nodded deeply. Then she turned to the first princess, who was breathing hard. Lisa. Yes. I abdicate the throne to you. I will go to the front with the royal guard. At those words those present were shaken. However, the commotion quickly subsided, and several bowed their heads in silence. If they were to evacuate the populace, someone had to hold back the enemy army. Or perhaps, if the queen stayed behind while the troops fled, the people might be saved, but that was too naive. In these 4 years, Beastmen had shown no mercy to demons. If they did not want to disappear, they had to both resist and flee at the same time. Yet at that moment few forces remained in the kingdom. They could have ordered the defeated troops to die fighting, but those who would have to give that order were Leon's cherished daughters. By succession the next in line would be the 5th Princess Sylviana or, failing that, the 2nd Princess Rubina, who commanded her own army. In either case, Leon did not want them to die. Though they still retained some naivety, at last her daughters had become worthy. Leon did not consider herself so rotten as to use her daughters as a shield and run. Besides, the royal guard remained an elite force, intact. Under her command morale would be high, they could hold the enemy long enough for the people to escape. I will go with you, said an old dog who had served Leon for many years. Once a warhound who tore enemies apart on the battlefield, he now served as a minister and spent more time seated, but his fangs had not fallen out. Other elders who had served since Lisa's birth also volunteered. They were the same loyal ones, those who had fled with her, gritted their teeth to keep the Beastman people alive, and shared their sorrows and joys. Don't wag your tails like that. Do you think I'll leave you behind? Then we will go with you too, the young men offered, raising their hands. But Leone shook her head at them. You must help Lisa and ensure the beastmen survive. Those were the last words she left before departing. Even when the continent was once again on the brink of being swallowed by the waves of war, the four of them continued their journey, an elf, an orc, a succubus, and a human who had once been a fairy. An orc accompanied by 3 women, and one of them, on top of that, a succubus. Under such circumstances, it would have been impossible for nothing to happen. Every night and every dawn or even morning and midday entwined without rest, the orc would proudly display the virility of his race with a lewd grin, the succubus, drooling from the corner of her mouth, would revel daily in her feasts of pleasure, and the elf and the human, praying that no unwanted life would be conceived, cursing the god who had thrown them into such a fate as the light faded from their eyes. But none of that had happened. Damn it, the snow won't stop. Are you sure we're going the right way? Yes, don't worry. But don't you think the path feels more natural that way? I mean, maybe this time it wouldn't hurt to trust my intuition. That's literally the opposite direction. Thunder Sonia climbed the snowy mountain, the former fairy clinging close to her body. Looking back, she saw Carrot right behind her, and a few steps further, Bash, his face dark and silent, following them without a word. Both of them had completely lost the light in their eyes. Although they weren't ascending a cliff like a certain orc hero, they were climbing a fairly steep slope. The area was covered in snow, visibility was poor, and with few trees around and no knowledge of the terrain, the elf Thunder Sonia began to feel uneasy. On top of that, she hated the cold. Sir Bash, aren't you cold? My apologies. Please endure it just a little longer. During their journey, Carrot had been constantly tending to Bash. Her dedication was so intense it was painful to watch. Even so, the orc's empty eyes reflected nothing. He didn't respond, he simply accepted the succubus's care. For her part, Carrot, wrapped in several layers of fabric that concealed her figure, looked like a fluffy caterpillar as she took care of the orc. She tried to keep her distance whenever possible, but when necessary, she was excessively diligent. The succubus's eyes, visible between the layers of cloth, showed that she was barely holding on to her sanity, she was at the very edge of her endurance. Thunder Sonia, knowing that Bash was only a virgin and nothing more, couldn't help but think that perhaps she was the worst one among them. Hey, are you really sure about this? We came all the way here because of your suggestion, Thunder Sonia, but, will Mr. Mark really disappear? We'll find a way. Probably. Thunder Sonia's reply was faint, almost lifeless. The journey had been peaceful, but that didn't mean there hadn't been incidents. They had been attacked several times, some attempts seemed to target Thunder Sonia, others perhaps Carrot, the traitor. Among their attackers were humans, ogres, and demons. It seemed to her that humans were the majority perhaps because Thunder Sonia was being hunted in human territory. But as long as their opponents were ordinary folk, none could stand against the combined strength of Thunder Sonia and Carrot. And with Zell's support, they were practically invincible. However, just before they entered demon territory, one attack changed the atmosphere completely. It wasn't a sense of mortal danger that made them tense, but a different kind of tension. A succubus had ambushed them in the night. That woman didn't seem to belong to Gadiga's forces. In the succubi nation, many had recently gone their separate ways. Under the pretext of reducing mouths to feed and helping impoverished young ones, a dozen veteran succubi had left their homeland. At least, that was the official reason. Thanks to the support Nazar had provided about a year earlier, the food situation among the succubi had improved considerably, deaths from starvation were far fewer now. In truth, however, many of those stray succubi were reinforcements sent to Gadigas. Among them were even some whom Carrot had personally contacted. When Gadigas was resurrected, they were to go to his side, to appear at a certain place. Of course, the queen knew nothing of this. Though she was aware that such factions existed within her country, she chose to ignore them. Succubi needed to maneuver in such a way that they could survive whether Gadigas won or lost. Not all of those who left did so to join him. Some, who genuinely believed the tale of reducing mouths to save the young, departed out of a sense of duty. They were sincere, proud succubi. They shouldn't be called naive. The government would never publish statistics on deaths from starvation, and if one felt hunger every day, it was only natural to assume that the weakest infants would die first. The succubus who attacked Bash and the others that day was one of those strays. A kind-hearted succubus with a strong sense of responsibility, who had answered the call to sacrifice herself for the greater good. By coincidence, when Thunder Sonia and her group made camp, she happened to be resting inside the hollow of a tree nearby. The first thing she felt was fear. After all, the one who had appeared was Thunder Sonia, the most famous elf in the world, known also as the cruelest, and the one who had killed more succubi than anyone else. Upon seeing her, the succubus could do nothing but freeze in terror. But at the same time, her gaze fell upon the orc who accompanied the elf. He was an orc with an incredibly appetizing appearance. Before she realized it, she was already drooling. Under normal circumstances, she would have been able to restrain herself, she would never have attacked anyone near Thunder Sonia. But she was starving. So hungry that madness was beginning to take hold of her mind. Faced with that orc, radiating such a deliciously tempting scent, it was impossible for her to endure even one more night. At midnight, while everyone slept deeply, she leapt out of the hollow of the tree and, without warning, released her pink mist, the charm mist, directly at Bash. Of course, that pink mist had no effect on Carrot, Thunder Sonia, or even Zell. Both Thunder Sonia and Carrot sensed it immediately and took defensive stances. However, before they could act, the succubus had already managed to get close enough to Bash. She hadn't done anything else yet, she grabbed him from behind and, pressing a sharp dagger against his neck, was caught in the light of the torches. Could it be Cucumber? Said Carrot, recognizing that familiar face. Why are you here? And that was when Cucumber finally realized who it was she had pinned to the ground. But for her, it was already too late, she too was at the limit of her strength. In the succubi country, the cases of death by starvation are increasing. To reduce the number of mouths to feed, it was proposed that some of us volunteer to leave. I was one of those who did. Cucumber was much thinner than when Bash had last seen her, she looked on the verge of starvation. Succubi could indeed survive for long periods without feeding, but even they had a limit. In her homeland, they could barely eat the bare minimum, it was only natural that, after leaving, she would end up like this. Cucumber, I'm warning you. The one you're trying to devour is Sir Bash. You yourself once said that he saved you during the defense of the Piles River, didn't you? I did, yes, but I'm hungry, so hungry. I haven't eaten in days. And there isn't a single decent man around here. And what about your pride as a succubus? Where did it go? If you had done something with diplomacy, none of this would have happened. Those words, spoken almost in a whisper, made Carrot's eyes widen in shock and left her completely frozen. She couldn't respond. Lowering her head, trembling on the verge of tears, she fell silent, clenching her fists tightly. Sir Bash! I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Just a little, I promise. If you start counting the stars, I'll be done soon. I never thought of killing or devouring you, I swear. Please, have mercy, have mercy. Cucumber said this as she reached her hand inside Bash's trousers. No one moved to stop her. Thunder Sonia watched Carrot, as if asking with her eyes, she's one of your kind, what are you going to do? Zell, on the other hand, was trembling with excitement, finally, Mr. is going to sleep with someone. Even if Carrot hadn't moved, had Cucumber truly tried to go further, Thunder Sonia's lightning would have struck her down before she could do anything. But before that could happen, Bash murmured softly. All right. Do as you wish. At those words, Cucumber froze. Bash hadn't been charmed. For some reason, the pink mist had no effect on him. No one knew why. Perhaps the spell had been weak because of Cucumber's starvation, or perhaps Bash was so dejected and depressed that the charm simply couldn't reach him. Whatever the reason, he spoke with complete clarity. Do as you wish, he had said. You may eat me if you want. Ah! Ah! Cucumber's eyes flew wide open, and biting hard into her lower lip, she let out a heart-wrenching scream from deep within her throat. An instant later, she took the dagger still in her hand and slit her own throat. Why? Carrot stood motionless, eyes empty, watching her comrade fall to the ground and bleed out. She couldn't utter a single word before that comrade who, at the brink of death by hunger, had chosen to preserve her final shred of pride. From that day on, Carrot's mind teetered on the edge of collapse. Outwardly she seemed calm, but at night she would claw at her own skin while whispering with vacant eyes, "We must disappear. We shouldn't still be alive." She was like a cup filled to the brim, ready to spill over at any moment. Bash, for his part, remained as silent as ever. From his entire body emanated an overwhelming aura of negativity, a kind of resignation unbefitting of an orc hero. The darkness radiating from both him and Carrot wrapped the entire group in a heavy, suffocating gloom. Amidst that atmosphere, even Thunder Sonia couldn't maintain her usual lively energy. During their travels, they had heard rumors that elves and humans were at war. She had sensed it coming for some time, yet when it was finally confirmed, her heart sank. The two nations, manipulated by Gadigas, had ended up turning against each other. It wasn't yet an all-out large-scale war, and that was the only thing that could be called a small blessing, but how long would that fragile truce last? She thought that perhaps it would have been better to return to her homeland, even if it meant forcing the issue. Or maybe it wasn't too late yet. That thought crossed her mind again and again, only to fade each time. The one who held the group together was Zell. With her bright, energetic voice, she cheered everyone on with joyful words, pushing them toward their goal. That voice was, above all, a great comfort to Thunder Sonia. After all, it was a journey without guarantees. There was no certainty that a sure method even existed to erase Bash's mark, and even if they managed it, there was no assurance that everything would turn out all right. On a journey with no guarantees, what they needed most was baseless optimism. Until then, Thunder Sonia had always thought of fairies as little more than pests, but to be honest, this time she found them incredibly helpful. If not for Zell, her anxiety might have overwhelmed her, and she would have turned back to Elven lands. Having someone who always smiled and spoke with such cheerful energy was, without a doubt, a blessing. From then on, the group had continued their journey clinging only to a faint hope, as long as we can erase Bash's mark, everything will work out somehow. Even so, it's surprising that Beastman lost by such a huge margin, isn't it? Is that so? On a battlefield where Gadigas is present, that's only natural. We too, after finding no way to defeat him over and over again, eventually decided to assassinate him instead. Wow, though I remember us losing quite a lot back then too. That's because the mixed army of orcs and fairies was usually the one sent to the front lines. You were the first to fight, got worn out, and then ogres or demons who came afterward finished every battle. That's how it went back then. What? So we were being used as cannon fodder? Of course. With fairies who wouldn't follow orders and orcs who, after defeating a woman, dragged her off somewhere hidden, it was obvious they couldn't rely on them for critical battles. Yet, when you put it that way, it makes sense. Thunder Sonia and the others watched from afar the battle raging at the border between Demon Territory and the Beastman country. It was, without a doubt, an awe-inspiring fight. Although Beastmen had made no tactical mistakes, demons displayed movements that defied all expectation. From their vantage point, they couldn't tell exactly what was rampaging so violently, but they could see a gigantic creature, a monster unlike anything they had ever seen before, tearing through the Beastmen ranks. They wondered where such a thing could have come from, though, thinking about it, even in the Blackhead territory, the sage had used a newt to transform himself into a monster and wreak havoc. If one considered the possibility that other sorcerers besides that sage might exist, it wasn't so far-fetched after all. Friskup, I guess he taught them how to newt, then. Even so, there were more demon soldiers than I expected. Really? Not even Thunder Sonia knew exactly how many demons had survived. It was hard to believe that, even confined to those frozen lands, they had managed to gather such numbers. Even so, Poplatica and her followers had been moving in the shadows all those years. As a result, they had managed to assemble that army. They had hidden themselves, waiting for the right moment to rise, sharpening their fangs until the time of rebellion came. When one thought about it that way, it wasn't so strange after all. From a distance, it was hard to tell, but it might have been a mixed army. Just like with Succubi, there had been many who left their homelands to side with Gadigas. It wasn't clear whether orcs or fairies would do the same, but ogres, at least, would surely have been eager to take part in the war. Although that country seemed to handle diplomacy better than demons or succubi, that didn't change the fact that they were still oppressed. In fact, perhaps it was precisely because of their skillful maneuvering that they had managed to preserve their military strength. There might have been nations that thought if Gadigas lost, they would be punished for having aided him. However, if they used disguise to alter their appearance and look like demons, then from the outside, that army would appear to be composed solely of that race. It would look like an exclusively demon uprising. If they could convince others that any sanctions would fall only upon the demons, then allied nations could send troops without much hesitation. More and more of them will probably keep joining. In any case, when Gadigas was at the main camp, demons were practically unbeatable. Everyone who had lived during the time he was alive thought the same. In truth, they had never once managed to defeat him in direct battle. Joining his side was the same as betting on the winning horse. True, they had been defeated when Gedigas died, but now, many of those who had once been cornered clung to the illusion that if they could protect him this time, things would be different. It was hardly strange for them to think that way. Even the human chancellor, Crusader, might have joined Gedigas for that very reason. Whatever the case, demons had defeated beastmen. It was a victory more than sufficient to proclaim the resurrection of Gedigas, the return of the king who had once made the continent tremble. No doubt, some of those who had ignored Poplatika's call would change their minds after witnessing the result of that battle. And most likely, from that point onward, their numbers would only continue to grow. Thinking about that, Thunder Sonia couldn't help but feel uneasy, wondering whether it was truly all right for them to be wandering around a place like that. I also want to send this information to the Elven country. Aren't you going back? Don't be ridiculous. I promised we'd cure the mark, remember? We elves aren't humans, we keep our promises. Thunder Sonia no longer intended to return to the Elven country. Perhaps it had been a mistake to decide not to go back, but having come this far, it was already too late. If she returned now and said something like, "Ta-da! I wasn't really dead," it was doubtful that would be enough to restore the relationship between humans and elves. If elves had been pressuring humans under the pretext that the human royal family murdered Thunder Sonia, then it wouldn't be easy for them to retract that claim. In the worst-case scenario, elves could become divided, and even unthinkable as it sounded, resort to plotting Thunder Sonia's assassination to preserve the official version. She thought about writing a letter, but without her staff or even her own clothes, she had nothing that could serve as proof of her identity. A letter that mentioned giant monsters, disguise, or Newt, sent by someone who was officially dead, who would ever believe such a thing? Besides, in a situation where she wanted Gedigas to keep believing she was dead, she couldn't afford to leave any evidence that she was still alive. Well, considering that hunters still occasionally appeared on her trail, maybe they had already realized she was alive. Either way, there was no turning back now. Even if Thunder Sonia felt uneasy, wondering whether she had made the wrong decision, she had no choice but to keep moving forward. Now I finally understand why Bash kept you around. I'm really glad you're here. Oh? What's this? Getting all soft on me? The great Thunder Sonia finally realized how amazing us fairies are. Hey? Took a while, but you made it. Orcs figured it out ages ago, you know. You might be right. War wears down the spirit, and having someone as absurdly optimistic as you around probably helps keep us from hardening too much, though sometimes you make me want to strangle you. Battle after battle, comrades dying one after another. When the shadow of death began to brush against you two, words became scarce, and when you finally spoke, they were only reproaches or sarcasm aimed at your allies. There was no way to keep morale that way, and in the end, the units would be wiped out. It was a scene that repeated itself far too often. The reason Thunder Sonia had eventually taken on such a cheerful personality was precisely because she had witnessed that kind of tragedy so many times throughout the war. She felt that someone had to be the spark that kept the group's spirits alive. Having someone like that among them was invaluable to those carrying the weight of despair. Friskup, damn, I didn't think I could like Thunder Sonia even more, but here we are. I love Grandma Sonia so much. With that energy of yours, cheer up the two behind us too. Guess there's no helping it, hey? All right, you two. We're almost there, so move those legs. The sun's not gonna wait for us. But hey, the dawn will come again tomorrow, so chin up. 1, 2. 1, 2. It didn't matter who had said they were almost there. What mattered was believing it. With that thought in mind, Thunder Sonia pressed on, lifting her legs through the thick blanket of snow as she hurried her pace. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Whoa. Thunder Sonia's gone full power mode too. Let's go all out, all out. And so, the group finally reached the depths of the snow-covered mountains, where the ruins of a colossal sanctuary stood hidden from the world. Wow, this is really something. I didn't know there were ruins still in such good condition, Thunder Sonia murmured softly as she stepped inside. Though time had eroded them somewhat, the ruins were built from smooth, polished stone that still retained its grandeur. Across the continent, similar structures existed, but most were true to their name, ruins in the most literal sense, piles of rubble and dust. Occasionally, fragments of ancient texts or cultural relics were unearthed, stirring the excitement of a few scholars or collectors, but rarely offering anything of real value. During the war, no one had time to concern themselves with such matters. Still, from time to time, certain excavation sites yielded relics of the past, terrifying weapons of unusual power. For that reason, some nations had begun investing resources in the exploration of ruins. Among them, this place stood out for being in remarkably good condition. There was hardly any dust or grime, and no rats or other creatures to be seen. A few insects, perhaps a spider or a lizard here and there, but even those were rare. In several spots, the walls and ceiling emitted a faint glow, signs that some kind of protective magic was still active. Thunder Sonia knew spells to preserve objects, but she had never seen one last this long. If even she, with her many years of life, was unfamiliar with it, then it had to be a magic lost centuries ago. Still, I can't help feeling a bit disappointed. According to you, this was your hideout, right? I expected more resistance when we entered, but it's completely empty. Didn't they even leave someone to stand guard? If no one's coming in or out, there's no risk of being found, right? Lord Gadigas did say he'd relocate his base eventually. And since it looks like the war's really begun, I'm sure they've already moved. If that's the case, I'm worried there won't be any documents left. Don't worry. I bet the records are still here. Just as Thunder Sonia had said, the interior of the ruins was utterly silent. Yet it was obvious that people had lived there. There were footprints, faint scents, strands of hair, bits of dried food, clear signs of life. She wasn't a spy, so she couldn't estimate how many had been there, but there was no doubt that this place had served as a refuge for many. This way, said the succubus, moving forward with a face torn between exhaustion and resignation. They didn't have to walk far. After passing through the second door from the entrance hall, they arrived at a room filled with books. Heaps upon heaps of them, stacked neatly and untouched by time. An ancient library, yet one that showed no trace of decay. If this place held that many records, they might find not only clues about the magic that had resurrected Gadigas, but also detailed information on the Orsish mark. This is going to take forever to decipher. The sheer volume of documents was overwhelming, and worse yet, they were written in a language even she had never seen before. Thanks to her long life and experience, some characters looked vaguely familiar, but most were completely indecipherable. These books were older even than Thunder Sonia herself. Texts written more than 1,000 years ago. That alone spoke to how much the continent's writing and grammar had changed over the millennia. But Thunder Sonia was no scholar. Realizing that fact stirred no excitement in her at all. If I remember correctly, Pa Platica had made a cipher table. Hey, don't tell me they left something that important lying around. Hey? Isn't that over there? The former fairy asked, pointing to a nearby table. Hey? On the spot the former fairy indicated there was indeed a table piled with books. What caught their attention, though, were signs of recent activity, marks, loose notes, and stacks of papers scattered about as if someone had been working there until very recently. Among them they found a small notebook. When they opened it, they discovered a series of deciphering tables arranged by era. To some extent, the work looked complete. What carelessness! You have to tidy things like this up. Either hide them or take them with you, just leave them lying around is a no-no. They're important. We're talking about codes and stuff. Pa Platica was never good at organizing. Wow, and Gadigas didn't order anything? Like burn it all or something. Actually, someone suggested that, but Lord Gadigas ordered it to be left as it was. Why would he do a thing like that? He said it was so that, in the future, whoever came to read it wouldn't have trouble. Friskup, wait, is Gadigas trying to pull a Lelich but with the demons? That doesn't make sense. If anyone reads it, the ones in trouble would be them. Even so, it was lucky. Perhaps the most important documents had already been taken, especially those about the method to resurrect Gadigas. A demon such as him wouldn't have left records of that. But with that little notebook, researching how to erase the orc mark became much easier. All right, let's start deciphering. You two learn the basics of the method, and go look for documents whose titles seem relevant. However, just as they were about to begin the search, a crash echoed through the air. Gagon! The sound came from the entrance. Well, I suppose that was to be expected. Someone had entered the ruins. They weren't surprised, after all, they were in the northern lands, inside demon territory. Even if that refuge had been abandoned, it still held valuable information. There'd be no sense in leaving it unguarded. Thunder Sonia had used concealment spells, yes, but demons possessed extraordinary detection ability. If her magic had been enough to fool them, the war wouldn't have become as brutal as it had. I don't know how many there are. Zell, take Bash and hide in this room. I'll move to another and strike them by surprise. Carrot, what will you do? I'll help you, of course. Good. This will be our final push. Let's give it everything. Without giving Carrot any specific instructions, Thunder Sonia headed toward the entrance, ready to intercept the enemy. However, her steps suddenly came to a halt. So it's Beast Freuda. Standing at the entrance to the library was a figure, a demon woman. Beast Freuda, the swift steed. Thunder Sonia remembered her well. It was said that her legs could cross 1,000 miles in a single night. She was a renowned woman among demons, famed for her work in reconnaissance and espionage. A name worth remembering. She was strong, yes, but not nearly strong enough to be a match for Thunder Sonia. So, you knew I was here and came to make the first move, hey? But Beast Freuda didn't answer. She didn't even wear the usual mocking smile typical of demons. Instead, she covered her mouth with one hand, staring at something in sheer astonishment. Thunder Sonia followed her gaze. Zell was holding Bash's hand, while he stared back at them with an empty expression. That moment of distraction was a mistake. Just as Thunder Sonia gathered magic at her fingertips, ready to annihilate Beast Freuda before she could react, new footsteps echoed through the corridor. Well now, what an interesting visit. Two demons appeared. Thunder Sonia let out a short, ironic laugh. 8 eyes in total, 4 on the sides, 4 in front. There was no mistaking who it was. Sequence. It was Sequence, the Dark General, one of the most infamous high demons. And you must be Thunder Sonia, the great elven archmage. What brings you to a place like this? You're too early. I haven't even started doing anything yet. The man standing beside Sequence wasn't familiar to her. And if Thunder Sonia didn't recognize him, he probably wasn't anyone of importance, or so she wanted to believe. It wouldn't be the first time she had let her guard down and ended up surrounded by heavyweights. Still, in this situation, there wasn't much point in resorting to disguise. Besides, even if that man were a high demon, Thunder Sonia trusted the one covering her back, Carrot. Her charm was far stronger than that of an ordinary succubus. Even beings who could normally resist charm would easily fall under her spell. That demon wouldn't be an exception. Sequence, on the other hand, would likely resist it, yes. If that weren't the case, the Seven Races Federation would be led by a succubus, not a demon. They were equals precisely because they could oppose each other. Then let me change the question. At Sequence's cryptic words, Thunder Sonia looked at him suspiciously. What did you do to our benefactor? Your benefactor? Bash. Thunder Sonia raised an eyebrow in surprise. It had never once occurred to her that demons who despised all other races would refer to an orc, of all beings, as their benefactor. Why does he have a mark like that of an orc mage on his face? Were you the one who put it there? He looks strange, vacant. Are you keeping him under a spell? Or is it the succubus's charm? It was Carrot, who had been holding herself back until that moment, who burst out at the last insinuation. A succubus would never use charm on her benefactor. So it's elven magic, then? No, it's not that. Well, there are several circumstances behind it. Humph. Him calling Bash benefactor made Thunder Sonia relax her guard ever so slightly. If they kept quiet about looking for a way to kill Gadigas, there might be room to negotiate. But the man she was speaking to was a high demon. Unlike orcs, they lied easily and didn't hesitate to disguise both their rank and their appearance. He wasn't an opponent they could trust. He could feign confidence and then strike from behind. And what are you doing here? We were ordered to guard this region. We were told someone was moving about nearby. They also said they'd spotted the orc hero among them, appearing to be controlled somehow, so we came to investigate. And well, finding the great elven archmage here took us by surprise. If you already spotted Bash from a distance, wouldn't you have recognized me as well? Of course. That's why this whole thing is nonsense. By the way, when you say you were ordered, you mean Gadigas, right? My name is Sequence, the Dark General Sequence. No one give me orders except the Demon King. I'm surprised a general of your caliber isn't on the front lines. Protecting the base is also a duty. Demon resurrection is our supreme ambition. If Lord Gadigas has been revived, it is only right to obey him. All right, I see. Good. My old enemy, I'd like to say I'll avenge my fallen comrades at your hand, but the truth is I'm interested in the orc hero. Explain yourself. While you speak, your life won't be in danger. What an arrogant attitude you have, hey. Although I can't give too many details, it's not something we must hide, so I'll answer. Thunder Sonia sighed and, mixing a small lie with the truth, began to recount what had happened. What happened so that mark appeared on his forehead was apparently that Gadigas made it. Lord Gadigas? Why? Who knows? Anyway, as you saw, Bash had been depressed, so we decided to try to erase that mark, but there is no such spell, you understand. Still, when the mark appears, its bearer can use magic. That suggests the process of its appearance is related to magic. True. So it's an ancient, long-lost magic. If Gadigas learned it somewhere and applied it to Bash, and we went to that place, we might find out how to remove it. We mentioned the idea to Carrot, and she led us here thinking this place might hold what we seek. As Thunder Sonia explained, wondering how she should answer if asked why she and Carrot consulted so readily, Sequence kept his compassionate gaze fixed on Bash. He didn't seem interested in the details. And have you found anything? If you're so clever, why don't you listen? We've just arrived, we haven't investigated anything yet. Thunder Sonia snapped, grinding her teeth. The man before her was unpredictable, and that irritated her. It wouldn't do to start a fight right there. If they fought in that place, there was a risk the books would be destroyed. Sequence wasn't an opponent Thunder Sonia couldn't defeat, but defending the books while fighting would be another story. Fine. I've answered your questions. Are we done? If you want to fight, why don't we do it outside? I bet you don't want these books burning either. It seems Gadigas values them as well. Sequence fell silent for a long time. By Thunder Sonia's assessment, the situation was easily manageable. The male demon could be incapacitated by Carrot's charm, turning the battle into a 2 against 2. It didn't seem likely that the succubus would lose to the demon woman, and in a one-on-one, Thunder Sonia was confident she could handle Sequence. Even alone, she judged she had a fair chance of winning a 1 against 2 or even a 1 against 3. Indeed, you're right. Books are the compendium of wisdom. We must prevent their loss, but, well, I lack a bit of strength to face you right now. It seemed Sequence had reached the same conclusion as Thunder Sonia. So, we'll return to GE Fortress, gather enough power to defeat you, and come back. Let's say, in 20 days. Thunder Sonia tilted her head, puzzled as to why he would even tell her the number of days. What do you mean by that? We also owe a great debt to the orc hero. My, how honorable. What did Bash do to earn such loyalty? That hero you see there drove away a dragon that had been tormenting us for a long time. And he left without accepting any reward. Indeed, Thunder Sonia had already heard similar stories from Bash himself. And if it was him they were talking about, there was no doubt he could handle a dragon. The tale of how he had slain one in the Lemium Highlands was one of the most famous stories of all. Thunder Sonia hadn't seen it with her own eyes, but knowing that he had faced and defeated the creature from the Blackhead territory in direct combat, she had little reason to doubt it. Well, if that's what you intend to do, I won't stop you, said Thunder Sonia. Though she remained alert, she had no choice but to let them go if they were leaving. If they defeated Sequence there, Gadigas' forces would be weakened, but Thunder Sonia could not kill him without taking heavy damage herself. If she were gravely wounded, all would be for nothing. Moreover, if Sequence were eliminated, reinforcements would surely arrive long before those 20 days. Are you certain about this? If we hand over our knowledge of these ruins to the Elven Archmage, even Lord Gadigas, there's no excuse. But look, at that pathetic hero. When Sequence turned his gaze, the reflection of Bash's hollow, empty state filled his eyes. To Sequence, Bash had been just a year ago the calm warrior who had driven away the dragon and even won the affection of his own daughter, a model, exemplary son-in-law. Seeing him reduced to this was unbearable. Sequence understood well what it meant for an orc warrior to bear the mark of an orc mage on his forehead. A magical warrior was a disgrace among orcs. It was unthinkable that a fighter of Bash's caliber had never known a woman's embrace. Therefore, that mark couldn't be natural, it had to be some kind of magic or curse. Though he found it hard to believe Gadigas would do such a thing, the fact remained, the mark was there, etched into Bash's forehead. If the Demon King had truly done it, Sequence had every right to be outraged. To fight and kill an orc brutally could still be justified in war, but to humiliate him in such a way was another matter entirely. There were acts that could be permitted, and acts that could never be forgiven. Friskup, I take my hat off to Sequence. His own daughter had set out on a journey to repay Bash's favor. However, since she was not at his side now, it was clear they hadn't been able to reunite, or she had died along the way. In any case, demons still hadn't been able to repay their debt to the orc hero. Therefore, they had to act accordingly. Even if that meant going against Gadiga's wishes, Sequence decided, on his own, to help Bash. Still, for someone with the title Dark General to openly oppose Gadiga's would be shameful. The Demon King sought to restore the demons' glory and take them out from ruin. Sequence had no intention of standing in the way of that goal. That's why, he chose to let them go. We'll see each other on the battlefield. Thunder Sonia, we must die in combat. What a pity. I plan to stay in an orc den and have lots of children. You'll have to die alone. Ha, 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 ha. Sequence left, laughing. Thunder Sonia watched him disappear into the blizzard from the ruins entrance and murmured softly. So Bash is respected even by the demons, hey. There weren't many beings who enjoyed recognition from both demons and succubi. Moreover, from what she'd heard, humans and dwarves admired him as well. Surely, whether she knew it or not, he was respected by nearly every race. Perhaps there was no other like him on the whole continent. Thinking that the man she was trying to help was of that caliber made Thunder Sonia unable to contain her emotion. All right. If Sequence said 20 days, he'll come back exactly then. We don't have much time, but we'll investigate everything we can. With that, Thunder Sonia set to work on deciphering the ancient texts. Friskup, okay, folks. Batch release time. Speedrunning the arc. Kinda. Thank you very much to somebody, Elman and Cartilo-sama. This 3 chapters are pretty much sponsored, so I hope you like it. Happy face. To put it bluntly, from the start the book they were looking for appeared almost immediately. It wasn't the one related to the mark. Surprisingly, what they found was a volume describing a method to confront Gadigas. The very thing they had assumed probably didn't exist appeared with astonishing ease. All the related texts had been gathered in one place. It was, to some extent, incomprehensible that they hadn't even hidden or destroyed them. And upon finding it, Thunder Sonia seriously wondered why Gadigas hadn't ordered its destruction. She even thought it might be a trap. If Carrot's story was to be believed, it was easier to assume Poplatica was simply a careless woman who'd forgotten to burn it despite being told to. Or perhaps someone had disobeyed the order to leave them and burned others on their own. Why hadn't this one been destroyed? But once Thunder Sonia finished reading the book, another thought crossed her mind. Could Gadigas have felt fear too? The title of the book was The Monster Who Could Not Die When His Time Came. It told of events so ancient that their exact date could no longer be determined. In ancient times, there had been someone who, like Gadigas, had been resurrected through old magic. It wasn't known whether this person was man or woman, nor even what race they belonged to, but it was said they were immensely powerful. They had likely been revived to confront some war or particular threat, this being fulfilled its purpose and, with overwhelming strength, wiped out the enemy. They were far too strong. The rulers of the age grew fearful and tried to kill them but failed. For in addition to their immense might, that being had gained an immortal body. The resurrected one united the realm and proclaimed themselves king. Thus began a long-lived empire ruled by an immortal, all-powerful monarch. Other races joined forces in an attempt to overthrow the king, but none succeeded. The immortal monarch conquered the continent and subjugated all other races as slaves. However, the tyrant was eventually defeated by a single race, a race who, long before the king's rise, had lived in near slavery to the ancestors of the royal line. That people, after years of preparation and festering hatred, developed a special magic that nullified immortality and slew the king. They must have spent too many years sharpening their fangs for that moment. No one knew what kind of suffering the king had endured, nor what kind of ruler they had been, whether benevolent or cruel remained uncertain. But it was said that when struck by that magic, the king offered no resistance to the blade turned against them. They murmured that at last they could die and accepted their end. Gadigas had been resurrected. He had been denied death. And when he revived, he became an immortal monster. Though perhaps not fully conscious of it, Gadigas might have vaguely realized that he had turned into an undying being. He may never have tested it deliberately, but the thought must have lingered in his mind, at least until the moment Thunder Sonia struck him down. Gadigas had been a wise man. It wouldn't have been strange if he'd felt fear at the idea of continuing to live against his own will. Even Thunder Sonia could have ended up in that same state. She too had extended her life through elf secret arts. 1,200 years. She wasn't immortal, but it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say she was untouched by time. Through such a long life, she had experienced everything. There had been good things, yes, but many more painful ones. More than once, she had wished for death. Had she strayed even slightly from her path, she probably would have chosen it. Not being immortal was, in truth, what allowed her to keep moving forward despite the despair. Yet, time and again, she had felt that her turn had already come. She was tired of outliving the young, and she meant it sincerely. Right now, she still believed she couldn't die, but she knew that someday that thought would turn into "I just want this to end." It wouldn't be strange. Thunder Sonia could die at any moment, she was immortal to time, but not to death. That was why she understood how truly terrifying it must be to have no means to die when that moment finally came. I suppose Pa Platica must have felt fear too. On the other hand, the reason Pa Platica hadn't disobeyed Gadiga's orders could be inferred from another text. In that book was written the story of someone who had also tried to resurrect another being, but failed. Attempting to control a power far beyond their reach had brought forth an unknown and monstrous creature. And that account didn't read like a mere fable or an ancient warning, it felt as if it had been written by the survivors of a kingdom being destroyed by that beast, driven by guilt and remorse. Perhaps Pa Platica feared that something similar might happen if she were to die before completing her work. If Gadigas were to be resurrected as an uncontrollable being, or if, after her death, someone else tried to bring him back and failed in the same way. That fear must have taken root deep within her heart. It wasn't an absurd worry, after all. The magic she was handling far exceeded anything she understood. Even so, in both cases the immortal king and the monster that slaughtered tens of thousands of people in the past had found a way to defeat them. Both had ultimately been destroyed. And that was why, in the present day, no immortal beings remained on the continent. There definitely existed a way of killing immortals. However, no description of such way could be found. Perhaps none had ever existed, or perhaps it had been destroyed out of fear that someone within their own bloodline might use it in rebellion. Thunder Sonia had combed through countless ancient texts, searching among those from the same eras or written by the same races, but she found nothing. Even so, the likelihood that the same technique had been used against both the king and the monster was high. There were clues: the race that had defeated the king, the one that had slain the monster, the name of the magic, its underlying principles, the circumstances in which it was used, all of it matched almost perfectly, even though the events had taken place in different ages. Though the precise details had been lost, it was very possible that this knowledge had been passed down among those races through the centuries. For that reason, on the fifth day, Thunder Sonia changed her approach. She decided it would be best to ask that very race directly about the details of the magic, and spent the remaining days gathering information about the Orc Mark. Regarding that matter, there were no related records among the books Pa Platica had left behind, so she had to proceed blindly. For the next 10 days, she did nothing but devour books without rest. By the 15th day, Thunder Sonia was already quite exhausted. She had found nothing. She began resigning herself to the idea that perhaps no text about the mark existed at all. After all, searching without a clear lead took far more time than she had. Discouragement began to take hold of her, though in that remote northern corner, there wasn't much else she could do. Her anxiety would fade whenever she looked at Bashtho, sitting in the corner of the room, his empty eyes fixed on her. She couldn't just leave things as they were. To make matters worse, Carrot had also begun to weaken. Succubi could remain active far longer than humans or elves after absorbing vital energy, but it had been far too long since she'd last fed. She must have been starving. By the 17th day, Carrot gave in to her hunger and locked herself in another room to avoid attacking Bash. From that moment on, she never came out again. In truth, Thunder Sonia had the impression she had already lost the will to live. And it was on the 18th day that Thunder Sonia found that book. Well, I suppose this is as far as I can go. The book seemed to date back about 3,000 years. Among that mountain of texts, it could be considered relatively recent. Thunder Sonia regarded it as a common story. A myth, or perhaps a work of fiction. Something akin to the religions humans tended to follow. Such books were usually written by the powerful of their time. And the powerful, Thunder Sonia thought, always embellished the events concerning them and concealed the inconvenient ones. Over the last millennium, she had seen every kind of king and noble, and none had ever recorded their own shames in writing. When something embarrassing couldn't be omitted, they would disguise it elegantly, dressing it up in fine words. For that reason, had that book been in an elven library, Thunder Sonia would probably have laughed it off. Even in the book she found, such embellishments were evident. Despite the beauty of its prose, traces of greed seeped through. People always tried to hide their desires, just like certain succubus that despite having such carnal appetite preferred to conceal her hunger. Even so, there were far too many descriptions that caught her attention. Divine miracles, heroes, prayers. Expressions that, just a few years ago, Thunder Sonia would have dismissed without a thought. But now, there were simply too many coincidences. If this were true, it would turn everything upside down. History's incredible. Now I understand why they treat me with such respect. Do all elves feel this way, I wonder? She sighed, murmuring to herself. If what was written there were true, many would be deeply moved. But deep down, Thunder Sonia didn't really care anymore whether it was true or not. Yes, the essence didn't lie there. Whether something was true or false no longer had any bearing on the present. For Thunder Sonia, who was merely an observer now, it could be something admirable, astonishing, even, worthy of being told, but whether the other side rejoiced or not was another matter entirely. Though Thunder Sonia was usually a woman with little sense for reading a room, she understood that much quite well. For Bash, at this point, such a truth probably wouldn't matter in the slightest. Bash was a virgin, something shameful for an orc these days. That was his reality. And, paradoxically, if that truth turned out to be real, the situation could become extremely dangerous. If what was written in that book was indeed true, how should I tell him? Remaining silent wasn't an option. Everything she had done up to now had been for this very purpose. Besides, depending on how she put it, perhaps Bash might regain his spirit. However, she had no idea how to say it. Thunder Sonia had never been good at choosing the right words in moments like these. She believed that when something was difficult to say, it was best to just come out and say it directly. Better that than beating around the bush or saying it so vaguely that it made no sense at all. Of course, that didn't mean difficult things suddenly became easy. For example, when someone died, especially when someone died protecting her. Countless times, Thunder Sonia had been the one to deliver the news of those who had given their lives for her to their families. She never did it thoughtlessly, she always reflected deeply and conveyed it with heavy sorrow. And without exception, they all forgave her. Or rather, they forgave her with pride, as though that sacrifice had been an honor. Thunder Sonia always promised to carry the weight of those deaths, yet she could never escape the guilt that filled her heart. This time, no one had died. But even so, she had to make a report, one that, depending on how she conveyed it, could mean a final farewell between her and Bash. In moments like this, she would usually ask someone for advice. Lately, that someone had been Aconite. That boy always knew exactly how to point out my flaws at the right time. How nostalgic! She recalled that he was now married, constantly traveling between the Elven country and the Beastman nation. He worked as a mediator between the two races, undoubtedly working tirelessly until the day he died. After all, since Beastman's defeat at the hands of demons, he must have been busier than ever. There was no one left to tease or scold Thunder Sonia anymore. With her chest tightened by that haze of thoughts, Thunder Sonia stepped out of the library. Oh, taking a break. In front of her, in the middle of the room, sat the former fairy, crouched without shame before a blazing fire. She was roasting something that looked like a lizard skewered on a stick. Those lizards, apparently, were plentiful in certain parts of the ruins. Though the place didn't seem to offer much in the way of food, the lack of predators had made them plump and nourishing. During those 20 days, Zell had been bringing Thunder Sonia lizards almost every day, roasting them and feeding her with an awe. No, I just finished my research. Oh, finally. That took quite a while, huh? I wish I could have helped you more. You helped plenty. Cooking is important work too. In fact, Carrot had helped at first, but she wasn't much use anymore. Bash was still little more than an empty shell. Someone had to take care of food, and Zell had done an excellent job of it. Back when she was a fairy, it had been hard to tell what she even existed for, but now she had become indispensable. Perhaps, Thunder Sonia thought, fairies had always been such diligent creatures, they just got distracted by nonsense. Phew, geez, I'm exhausted, Thunder Sonia exhaled with a long sigh as she plopped down onto the floor and picked up one of the roasted lizards. Ah, that one's not cooked through yet. I don't need a magic coal, it doesn't have to be charred. Besides, half raw is when it tastes best. For Thunder Sonia, as long as something was edible, that was enough, that was her philosophy. It had been centuries since she'd last had diarrhea from eating anything. Maybe she'd developed some kind of resistance. By now, Thunder Sonia could probably eat even a raw poisonous spider. Still, you've got quite a serious face, hey. Yeah, well. I found some relevant information, but not exactly what I was looking for. It's not bad, really actually, it's good from my point of view but I don't know how the person involved will take it. And so, here I am, racking my brain about how to tell him. Ah, yeah, I get it. Those things happen, hey. Zell replied with a vague nod, keeping her eyes on the campfire. It wasn't clear whether she was really listening or just responding out of habit. Still, the lizard was cooking perfectly, no burnt spots at all. Zell had improved a lot over the past 10 days. Well, even so, you can't just not talk about it. After all, we're here because of your idea, surviving 20 days in this forsaken place. Yeah, but... Zell, for example, if you could, would you want to be a fairy again? Well, kind of, yeah, I'd like to go back, but I don't really mind being like this either. Though, if I could ask for something, I'd want just a little bit more magic power. You know, I'm super close with the spirit of the wind, but in this body I can't hear its voice anymore. I'd at least like to get it back to that point. That's not a little bit of magic power, that's an absurd amount, Thunder Sonia sighed. Being able to hear the voices of spirits, let alone communicate with them, was something only a handful of elves in a millennium could achieve. Fairies held a disproportionately vast amount of magic within their tiny bodies, and the most gifted among them stood practically at the pinnacle of the world in terms of magical power. And what if I told you there's a way to do that? Hey? Really? Lucky me. That would be super mega amazing. Wait, does that mean I can go back? I found a record about dragon magic. I didn't know before, but it seems we elves use a similar magic. If I can get my hands on Newt's chant, I could develop a formula to return you to your original form. It'll take time, though. Oh. Elves possessed a secret method. In short, it was used to turn the fetus in a mother's womb into a being of the same race as the mother. It was an ancient magic, developed long ago to prevent unwanted births during wars against orcs. It had likely been created by imitating dragon magic. Though it only affected the mother, its structure was almost identical to the original Newt magic. If she could analyze the human version of Newt and combine it with that elven magic which could be applied to others, she could complete a Newt spell capable of being cast on third parties. Well, it would almost certainly end up classified as a forbidden magic, so she wouldn't be able to make it public. And that library was full precisely of such forbidden spells. None of them included full formulas, but judging by the descriptions, they were all kinds of magic no one would ever want spreading around. I see, so I can go back. In that case, I guess I'll return to my old self. Hey? But you just said you didn't mind staying like this. Won't you reconsider? Of course not. Next time, I'll just turn into a human with enough magic power to become a fairy again, Zell replied proudly, puffing out her chest. But Thunder Sonia shook her head. It's not such a convenient kind of magic. Newt only transforms you into what you believe yourself to be. So even if you turn back into a human, you'll end up just like you are now. Every being carried a preconceived image of other races. Zell had turned into this kind of human because, to her, this was what humans looked like. If she were to learn more about them and understand them better, she might change, but it wasn't a spell that could be adjusted so easily. Hey? Really, that's how it worked? Well, maybe I'd think about it a bit, but either way, I'll go back after I have Mr. Bash's child. After all, as an orc's wife, that's kind of a must. So you, really believe Bash will recover, hey? We're talking about Mr., right? If it's just that mark, that's no big deal, is it? He hadn't lost his ability to fight or to reproduce. He just had a mark, and that was why he'd lost his spirit. At least, that was what Zell believed. Well, I suppose you're right. After talking with Zell, Thunder Sonia felt somewhat relieved. So then, I didn't quite get it, what exactly did you find? I'll tell you now. In any case, it was already the 19th day. The limit was closing in. If they didn't leave the ruins soon, Sequence would find them. And after everything that had been said, he truly wouldn't hesitate to kill them. Besides, Carrot was no longer of any use. Even for Thunder Sonia, the chances of survival were slim. If the worst came to pass, she'd at least try to beg for Zell's life. All right. Either way, the time limit had come. She didn't know how things would end, but Thunder Sonia decided she had to speak, to tell the truth, and to lay bare her feelings. Zell, bring Carrot to Bash. We'll talk there. Roger that. With a big bite of lizard still in her mouth, Zell followed behind as Thunder Sonia stood up and walked toward where Bash was. In a corner of the library, the hero sat staring blankly into the void. Anyone who had seen him on the battlefield would never have believed it. No one could have imagined that the orc hero would end up in such a state. No one wanted to believe it. Not even Thunder Sonia wanted to see him like this. Bash. She held a book in her hand. A book that contained the truth. Bash, I'm going to tell you what was written in this book. The orc's eyes slowly turned toward her. Out of the corner of her eye, Thunder Sonia noticed Zell arriving, carrying Carrot on her back. At least she was still alive. Her eyes were vacant, but she wasn't dead. Though, in that state, no one would have believed she was the same succubus who had once wreaked havoc on the battlefield. Carrot, this concerns you too. First, I'll tell you what I found. But this isn't the conclusion, all right? So listen until the end, okay? Don't jump to conclusions, understand? As Thunder Sonia gathered her thoughts, she realized she had to start with the facts. And with resolve, she said, Bash, your mark will not disappear. The emptiness in their eyes deepened, now stained with despair. On that continent, a never-ending war raged on. No one knew when it had begun, nor when it would end, a war that had been fought the same way for 3,000 years. There were no such things as alliances or federations, each race fought its own battles against its enemies. At that time, elves basked in their splendor. They had piled up victory after victory, annihilated the centaurs, the lords of the plains, and built a glorious city upon those vast lands. Their might was such that they could be called rulers of the continent. They treated humans as slaves, had signed a non-aggression pact with demons, and called every other race monsters, exterminating them without mercy. The elves of that era might have claimed they lived in times of peace. Yet for all other races, it was an age of invasion. And their invading hand reached north, into the lands where the succubi dwelled. To elves, succubi were nothing but trouble, monsters who drained men dry while giving nothing in return, proud, wild, and untamable. Thinking of wiping them out, as they had done with the centaurs, was only natural for such arrogant beings. But succubi were not a weak race. They were intelligent, strong, and capable of flying short distances. Their reproduction did not depend on male or female, and each of them possessed deadly abilities specifically aimed at men. Thus, in those days, succubi had a great city deep within the forest. Such kingdom known as the Succubus Kingdom, which ruled over the entire woodland region. However, they were no match for the elves, who had already conquered the southern forests and the central plains. Little by little, succubi lost territory and numbers. It was then that another race arrived in the succubi's forest, one driven from the eastern plains by elves, orcs. This rough, violent race was at first seen by succubi as a new invader. Yet, from their perspective, orcs were hardly threatening, even somewhat endearing, like small, foolish animals. They were all men, clumsy to a fault, who approached the succubi with smiles, offering them food as if throwing themselves into the fire of their own accord, like chickens marching into the oven. Why had this race come to the succubi's domain? That too was the work of elves. Though succubi found these creatures adorable, elves had hunted them down and sought to wipe them out. Succubi, in their peculiar sense of nobility, decided to protect these cute little beings from the elves' merciless hands. And so, they began to look after the orcs. That relationship turned out surprisingly well. Orcs were needlessly proud but had the instinct to bow before the strong. As a race, the succubi who were, to orcs, beings no male could ever defeat stood above them. To orcs, women were creatures meant to be impregnated and looked down, yet succubi could not actually bear orc children. They resembled women, but were not. Thus, they lay just outside that orcish instinct to look down on females. It didn't take long for some succubi to earn the orcs' trust. As for succubi, the truth was that most of them looked down on orcs. A race made up only of men, livestock that couldn't survive without their aid, adorable little pets, in their eyes. Still, that didn't mean they were useless. Though succubi saw them as weak, orcs' bodies were sturdy, and some among them were quite strong. Many had a natural instinct for battle, and in the wars against elves, they became reliable allies, and also an excellent source of nourishment. As for the relationship between the two races, it could be said it resembled that which humans had with dogs or cows, or perhaps a blend of both. Like dogs, orcs were useful for hunting and war; like cows, they provided sustenance. And, moreover, the more the succubi devoured them, the tamer orcs became. Of course, if they overfed, the orcs would die, but succubi knew how to restrain themselves. To them, orcs were convenient, adorable, and deeply cherished creatures. When they defeated an enemy, if it was a man, the succubi devoured him; if it was a woman, the orcs took her. In that way, the succubi sated their hunger, and the orcs multiplied. Thus, for many long years, the sweet coexistence between succubi and orcs continued. The war against elves grew fiercer. Having conquered vast territories, elves had increased both their population and their might. Under ordinary circumstances, a combined army of succubi and orcs would have been crushed without effort. However, elves had made too many enemies on too many fronts. They were fighting against every race surrounding the plains, and for that reason, succubi and orcs managed to endure; they were never overwhelmed. They lacked the strength to counterattack, but neither were they defeated. As the orc population grew, a movement began to stir among succubi, one that sought to improve their position. After all, though clumsy, orcs could speak, and some succubi with more humane ideals began to question whether it was right to keep treating them as mere livestock. Thus, succubi implemented a new system, known at the time as the night livestock system. To each member of the royal succubus family was assigned the strongest orc of his generation. Perhaps the system carried a hint of contempt, or perhaps it was born of envy. Envy that an orc might serve royalty? Not exactly. The truth was that many succubi wanted to claim one of those adorable orcs for themselves alone. However, that name didn't last long. Just as many succubi desired, the knights ceased to serve only the royal family, and the succubus nobility began to imitate them. In time, the custom spread throughout the kingdom. The livestock knights came to be known simply as orc knights. Before long, it was widely accepted that for a succubus, having an orc knight was a symbol of maturity and social standing. Every household needed at least one. On the orc's side as well, being recognized by a succubus and becoming her knight was considered a great honor. The stronger the warrior, the more likely he was to catch a succubus's eye. Orcs believed this wholeheartedly, and indeed, succubi desired strong orcs. Orcs trained relentlessly and died happily on the battlefield. However, at some point, both orcs and succubi came to realize something. No more heroes were being born. Yes, orcs had the concept of a hero, an exceptionally powerful warrior. Since ancient times, the orcs had aspired to become heroes. They dedicated their daily battles to the war god Gudgoza, dreaming of the day they would earn that title. A hero was one who had offered his body and life to his god. When succubi first took orcs under their protection, many heroes still existed. Excluding the young, more than half of the adults, even the elderly who could no longer fight, could be called heroes. Their combat prowess was so great that even the proud succubi acknowledged them and wished to keep them close. But by the era when orcs became knights, no new heroes were born. This was a loss for both succubi and orcs. The war against elves was intensifying, and succubi needed ever stronger knights. They themselves trained ceaselessly, taking pride in their strength. They had no use for weak orcs. And that way of thinking was, in turn, shared by the orcs themselves. They felt a faint but constant unease as they watched their race grow weaker. Moreover, in those days, only heroes were permitted to sire children. When heroes ceased to be born, orcs inevitably began walking the path toward extinction. The queen of that generation had as her knight the last surviving hero. That orc, already past 50, had saved her countless times on the battlefield and led her to victory. They had shared half a lifetime together, and had they been able to bear a child, it would not have been strange for them to wed. Such was the bond of trust between them. It was said that, worried about the fate of his people, the queen spoke to the warrior. "Has no one yet appeared to inherit your flame?" To which the hero replied, "If none appear, then extinction is all that awaits us." The succubus queen felt pity for the orcs, who had come to accept their own demise. After all, orcs had never stopped fighting. They still battled for the succubi or for their own kind against the wicked elves. Though no longer heroes, the orc knights were brave and fierce. They were not heroes, but they fought with the desire to become one. Perhaps, at first, it was succubi who had aided orcs, but now, without a doubt, it was succubi who relied on them. And so, the queen resolved that she, too, wanted to help the orcs. If no heroes were born, orcs would perish, for according to Orcish custom, only heroes were allowed to sire offspring. It was not that the others were incapable of doing so, but the act was strictly forbidden among them. When the last hero died and no new one arose to take his place, orcs would cease to perpetuate their lineage. To save the orcs, the queen began to think. What, in the first place, was a hero? Why was it forbidden for the others to have children? Who had imposed such a restriction? There was no way to know the truth. Orcs were ignorant, they could neither read nor write, and no written records had survived. So the queen decided to ask. She questioned her own hero, ordered the nobles to question their knights, and even issued a decree for common citizens to ask the orcs around them. Thus, little by little, a vague legend began to surface. It was said that, in ancient times, orcs had been a much weaker race. No one knew exactly what that weakness had entailed, but apparently, there had been an age when they lived oppressed by other races. During those days, an orc warrior prayed to a god, begging for strength in exchange for all he possessed. Day after day, he offered as tribute the spoils won in battle and repeated his plea. The other orcs mocked him, saying that praying would change nothing. Yet one day, the altar vanished along with all the offerings. The god had heard his prayer. That praying man became the first hero. A symbol appeared upon his brow, and he gained the power to command fire and lightning, with which he annihilated his enemies. The orcs proclaimed that hero their king. The king then commanded all who wished to become like him to do the same, to dedicate their battles to God. Frisk up, holy shit! Guys, did you read that? Read it again, I'll wait. What a damn plot twist! That explains why only heroes could have children, because they had to reach 30 and ascend into higher orcs before leaving descendants. Damn, that just flipped the entire meaning of Bash's journey in a few paragraphs. From that moment on, the orcs grew stronger. Heroes began to be born one after another, and their race as a whole became powerful. They had no enemies left, until others appeared who could wield the same power as the heroes. Others who, though they possessed equal might, were far more intelligent than orcs. Thus began the invasion of the elves. That account was, in essence, a summary compiled by the queen. The orcs themselves knew only fragments of the story, and each told it a little differently. The only detail consistent in every version was the notion that they had offered their battles to God. The succubus queen was wise. From that legend, she reached a conclusion, and fell into despair. She realized that her own people had committed an irreparable sin against the orc race. Forgive me, my knight. My beloved green-skinned warrior. Through tears, the queen knelt before the last hero, begging for his forgiveness. The orc hero remained silent, not uttering a single word. Heroes could only be born through a divine miracle. And for the orcs to receive such a miracle, there was a condition. According to the queen's hypothesis, it was precisely this: to offer their battles to God. To offer everything. To offer themselves. To devote their entire being to God. Then, what did it truly mean to offer oneself? Orcs were a race with an extraordinarily strong sexual appetite. Yet only males were born among them. If they could not impregnate other humanoid races, they could not increase their numbers. What that first hero had offered to his god was none other than this: his chastity. Succubi also had their own religion, and in it was taught that the gods loved what was irreversible, what could never be taken back. Thus, what the god had demanded of the orcs was their virginity. An orc who lived for decades without lying with anyone would become a hero. But in the present-day succubi kingdom, nearly all orcs offered their bodies as food. Young orcs were regarded as first fruits and were traded at exorbitant prices among the succubus nobility. Orcs, in turn, believed that giving their first battle to a succubus was an honor. They had made a terrible mistake. They had not offered themselves to their god but to succubi. Yes, the orcs had been devoured by them. It was a relationship both sides had wished for. Orcs loved succubi, and succubi loved orcs, or so they believed. But when the queen revealed the truth and tried to abolish the orc knights system, it was already too late. Everything collapsed. When it became known that the succubi themselves had prevented the birth of new heroes, they sank into despair and guilt, while orcs, realizing that they could never again become heroes, were overwhelmed by hopelessness. The bond between succubi and orcs froze in an instant, and their hearts grew apart. Then the queen said to her knight, "Leave us. Orcs and succubi can no longer coexist." The queen forbade treating orcs as food. It no longer mattered that it was too late, the hero still lived. As long as the hero remained alive, there was still a chance for new children to be born, and if pure offspring were born, new heroes might yet arise. However, he could not stay by her side. For she had come to love her hero far too deeply. "I will stay with you." That was what the hero said. He told the queen that he didn't want to be separated from her. He was a man of few words, and not even the queen could fully grasp his true feelings. But at that moment, hearing him choose her over his own race, the queen's heart was deeply moved. And so, the queen made a decision: she had to reward the orcs. If the hero existed by divine decree, then that was a law of the world. And if one wished to change the laws of the world, the only way was to have the gods establish new ones. Thus, the queen resolved to pray to the gods. She would offer her very being. Fortunately, in the realm of the succubi, there also existed deities, the divine twins. It was said that those two goddesses symbolized the essence of the succubi, the ability of women to reproduce with one another, and that every succubus who gave birth was required to make a pilgrimage in their honor. To one of those goddesses, the queen offered her body and soul. For days on end, she prayed without rest. She prayed ceaselessly, without sleep. Just as the ancient orc hero once had, she offered the prey she hunted each day as sacrifice. And then, the god answered. The succubi were granted the power to elevate orcs to the rank of heroes. However, it was already too late. Those prayers had taken far too long. By the time the change manifested within the succubi, the last orc hero had already died. Deprived of their hero, the orcs dwindled in number, those who remained grew old, and many of the young had already left the succubi kingdom behind. They could no longer become heroes, but that did not mean they were incapable of siring offspring. If they cast aside their pride and broke their taboos, if they managed to capture a group of women, perhaps they could reproduce and rebuild their population. They would no longer be the proud warriors of old, but mountain bandits, yet their race would at least survive. The changes in the succubi were not visible to the naked eye. Their atonement had come too late. Even so, succubi had undoubtedly become beings capable of bestowing blessings upon the orcs. Friskup, holy hell! That's why when a succubus sleeps with an orc, he bears the mark of virginity forever. Moreover, the queen established several oaths to be taken when an orc was appointed a knight. They were vows not to treat them as cattle or servants, but as true comrades. The orcs had long since departed from the succubi's realm, yet the queen believed that, in some distant future, perhaps the two races could once again hold hands. And when that time came, that their alliance, their sweet bond, might last for all eternity. That was the queen's final will. Thunder Sonia closed the book with a faint plap and looked at Bash. He still wore that same lifeless expression, his gaze empty and distant. "Did you hear the story?" There was no answer. Well, he had probably heard it, but hadn't understood. Orcs weren't very good at following such complicated tales. In short, Thunder Sonia placed both hands on Bash's shoulders. "Your mark is a blessing." That, in essence, was what the book said. In ancient times, the orcs prayed to the gods to become stronger. They swore not to give in to sexual desire, to live their lives devoted entirely to battle. And the gods answered. The god of your race, Gudgoza, reshaped the bodies of the orcs. If one remained a virgin for 30 years, his body would fill with magical power, granting him such strength and endurance that he could become the mightiest of warriors. Thunder Sonia, however, suspected that this was not truly the work of a god. She was convinced it had been the result of a sacred relic. Nowadays, nothing among the orcs could be called such a thing, so whatever method had once been used must have been lost. Whether through prayer or through magic, that relic had surely been consumed, its power expended to transform the Orcish race. Most likely, after the events described in that book, the survivors changed the way they thought. Capture women, rape them, make them bear children, anyone with the mark is weak. Well, back then, they probably weren't wrong. If they hadn't increased their numbers, they would have gone extinct. And among those orcs, there must have been at least one with some wit. Or maybe some wandering demon lent them their knowledge. In any case, since individuals capable of using magic were powerful, someone must have come up with the idea of artificially creating orc mages by forcing a few to remain virgins for 30 years. Thunder Sonia continued, patiently. Bash's eyes moved, he was listening. These days, it's true that orcs tend to ridicule virgins. Being one might feel shameful to you. But you fulfilled the wish of the ancient hero. You reached the ideal that the orcs of old had set as the standard of a hero. An ideal, he repeated faintly. Thunder Sonia nodded, deeply and firmly. That's right. And not only that. You can bring hope to the next generation of orcs. Hope? Yes. Right now, you're still a virgin. But if you wanted to stop being one, you could do it any time you wished. Anytime. I could stop being a virgin. I had promised it would be when your mark was erased. But honestly, I wouldn't mind sleeping with you. You. Even I, Zell, the pretty one standing right here, think the same. And among all the women you've met these past 3 years, I'm sure there were plenty who would have been willing to sleep with you too. But I, never, no one ever. I saw you trying to hit on women in Blackhead territory. It was something to see. Even when we went out to eat, you worried about me. You wanted us to eat whatever I liked, though in the end you gave up because I turned you down. If you'd kept pressing that day, I might have ended up in your bed. That day, given her position, Thunder Sonia would never have actually slept with him. But she was an elf. Unlike orcs, she could lie as many times as she wanted. You orcs don't realize it, but right now you're standing on the brink of extinction. Elves and humans think it doesn't matter if you disappear. They have no intention of giving you enough women to reproduce. That's why you have to go find them yourselves. But since the old ways are forbidden, you can't do anything. Little by little, your numbers will dwindle, until one day you all die out, or someone finds an excuse to wipe you out entirely. It wasn't as if the elves or humans had created that treaty with the intent of achieving such an outcome. But inevitably, that was how things would turn out. And they would see nothing wrong with it. Even if the orcs began to grow uneasy and raise their voices, the others would simply look at them coldly and say something like, "You haven't demanded anything these past years. You're just getting what you deserve. But you can do it. You have the ability to court women and win them over without humans or elves being able to reproach you for it. And you can teach that method to others. If you do, other orcs will also be able to bring women with them, and that way, they can avoid extinction." If Bash were to return to his homeland, especially if he did so accompanied by an exceptional woman, everyone would ask how he had done it. Then, he would proudly share his method, and the other orcs would start to imitate him without a doubt. Among them, there would surely be some who managed to charm women even better than Bash himself. In time, as more success stories accumulated, that would become the new norm among orcs. By then, Bash would have become a great orc, the one who took the first step. Only you embody the ideal of the ancient orcs and, at the same time, that of the modern orcs. You're the only one who can truly become an orc hero in both body and spirit. At some point, Bash had lifted his eyes and was now looking straight at Thunder Sonia. There was strength in them, more than before. There was still confusion, but also a glimmer of determination, as though the words he had just heard had rekindled something inside him. It's true that your mark will never disappear. You could hide it with magic or makeup, but it will follow you all your life. That was, ultimately, the final point. But to Thunder Sonia, it wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning of another promise. Even so, you are a hero. The orc hero. Even if your own kind doesn't acknowledge you, I do. You're the orc who defeated the great elf archmage Thunder Sonia without using magic. You slew a dragon. In the Battle of the Blackhead territory, your performance was brilliant. I'm not the only one, though the orcs may not understand it, the other races will. You are, without a doubt, an orc hero of great pride. If returning to the orcs is painful for you, come with me to the elf country. You'll lack for nothing. I'll take care of you. I'll even bear your children. And if I'm not enough, you may take other wives as well. I shouldn't allow that, but with you, I'll make an exception. So please, recover, and lend me your strength. Bash didn't respond. He seemed deep in thought. Perhaps he needed a little time to process Thunder Sonia's words. There wasn't much time left, but even so, his eyes no longer carried that empty, lifeless look from before. Lady Thunder Sonia, a voice called from beside Bash. The succubus, who until a moment ago had been sitting with a languid, careless air, had suddenly straightened her posture and adopted a tone of respect. Even her voice had changed completely, the usual laziness was gone. So, you're saying that those marks that appear when a succubus sleeps with an orc, aren't a curse? Thunder Sonia answered, ready for the moment she had known would come sooner or later. That's right. When the orcs were on the verge of extinction, the succubus queen of that era also resorted to some kind of forbidden art to alter the nature of her race. For a succubus, keeping an orc by her side feeding on him but not killing him meant acknowledging him as someone worthy of remaining with her. I'm sure she wished for them to continue living together from then on. Succubi probably loved the orcs. Well, maybe they looked down on them a little, but still, they loved them. Carrot lifted her shadowed gaze toward Thunder Sonia. And from what you just said, it sounds like you knew that Sir Bash wasn't attacked by any succubus in the past, and that he never raped any woman on the battlefield. That's right. Elves could lie with ease. But this time, Thunder Sonia did not. Although, well, from my position, I can't say for sure, can I? It's just what Bash told me. Maybe the first succubus he slept with used some kind of hypnosis to erase his memories. They say charm can wipe memories, though, that sounds a bit dubious, don't you think? And besides that, if you had returned to Gadiga's side, I would have died. So I was desperate too, you know. Although she had embellished the truth a little, Thunder Sonia had been honest. Carrot relaxed her shoulders, then stood and knelt before her. Even if there were some lies, you have my gratitude. I'm glad you forgive me. After hearing all this, I feel as though I've been freed. It seems that the shameless woman who devoured young Sir Bash never existed. Memories cannot be erased. Such magic probably didn't exist among succubi. Perhaps something like it could be found somewhere within those ruins, but no one in the present could use it. My heart is at peace. If not for you, I might have destroyed the succubi out of a misunderstanding. Good. Then, with that misunderstanding cleared up, all that's left is Bash. Bash had slightly changed his position. Specifically, he was staring at his own hands. A faint murmur escaped his lips, heavy with uncertainty, me, a true hero. If things continued like this, he would soon regain his resolve. However, that was the reality. Even if they returned, the fact that Bash had remained a virgin for 30 years and still was one would not change. In orc society as it was now, that surely wouldn't be accepted. Even so, Bash's achievements were immense. He wasn't just any hero. If he were to lose his virginity and bring back an extraordinary woman, there was a good chance he would be acknowledged, even with the mark. Moreover, even if that mark was proof of a true hero, he still had to lose his virginity. If he didn't, he would never reclaim his pride. After all, Bash was a man and an orc. That was why he had set out on his journey in the first place. Carrot. Yes. While we're at it, how about you stay here and take Bash's virginity? You're hungry anyway, aren't you? Hey. Though it was a proposal that could kill two birds with one stone, the response that came was a fury strong enough to kill on its own. You're asking me to turn Sir Bash into food? No, well, it's just that if you keep going like this, you'll starve to death by tomorrow, won't you? Weren't you the one who said you'd take Sir Bash's virginity once his mark was erased? That was if I erased it, remember? Besides, I don't have any experience, don't you think it'd make more sense for the most skilled one to take charge and teach him gently? There was fear in her tone. Carrot wasn't the only one who noticed it. Zell, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up. No, I think for orcs it would mean more if it were something like, in my first battle, I took the virginity of the great elf archmage and made her mine. Don't say it so crudely. Anyway, for my part, I wouldn't mind either. But it doesn't have to be the first time, right? So what you're saying is, you're not planning to go all the way, hey? I never said that. Even so, both Carrot and Zell sensed that things might indeed end up exactly like that. Hey, Zell. Actually, I think you'd be fine too. You love Bash from the depths of your heart, don't you? That's right. But, you see, among orcs it's common to boast during drinking feasts about their first battle. The first partner is important, you know? In orc society, the worth of the woman with whom they had their first experience carries great significance. If he said his first time was with an former fairy turned human, they'd laugh at him. But if he said he had his first experience after defeating Thunder Sonia during his journey, that would be a source of pride. I want Mr. to always live with his head held high. Well, couldn't you just let people think that, while in reality it's with one of you? Even if he's Mr., an orc can't lie. In fact, even if he weren't an orc, lying to yourself is pathetic. She said she didn't mind being the second or the third. That way of thinking was, without a doubt, something that would never have come from a pure human. Lady Thunder Sonia, prepare yourself. Today you shall elevate our orc hero and make him a true orc hero. Even if you say it so dramatically, well, I'm not sure. After hesitating for a moment, Thunder Sonia decided to ask the opinion of the last person involved. Bash, what do you want to do? Right. Bash had almost completely regained his senses. His eyes were focused again, and his awareness as an orc had returned. I am an orc, he thought. He might not have understood even half of the previous conversation, but still, perhaps he felt that his existence had been accepted as part of some grand myth. Or maybe, the fact that Thunder Sonia had spoken to him so sincerely had stirred something deep within him. Don't make that face. Or perhaps you don't want to do it with me. It's true, I haven't bathed in days. I remember that one time you did nothing to me, I was unfairly accused of smelling like an old woman, and now I might actually smell a bit like that. No, you smell nice. I want to do it with you. I see. Hearing him be so direct, Thunder Sonia fell silent. Bash then turned his gaze toward Zell. I want to do it with you too, Zell. Me after Thunder Sonia, mister. I think it'd be best to start with the great elven archmage, you know. And I want to do it with you too, Carrot. Carrot covered her face without a word. Then she curled up on herself, like a turtle, in a position that, though reminiscent of a caterpillar, had a strange sensuality. From her tense, glossy back came faint moans tinged with joy. Perhaps she was struggling against her own appetite. Then, after Zell, I will allow myself to receive a bit of your generosity, Carrot said in a trembling voice, as if forcing the words out. Bash turned his gaze back to Thunder Sonia. I will make love to you. If that's what you want, all right, let's do it. No orc used gentle words like make love. If it were the old Bash, he surely would have said something vulgar, like I'm going to rape you and get you pregnant. But no. That choice of words was living proof of the growth he had achieved. He had undoubtedly suffered discrimination for being an orc, and yet he had traveled through many countries, learning to speak in a way that didn't disgust women. All right, let's go to the other room. There's a bed over there, she said, trying to take his hand. Then Thunder Sonia saw it, the prominent bulge straining against Bash's crotch. Seriously, she muttered involuntarily. However, she wasn't a woman who would back down after coming this far. Still, she hesitated for a moment. Was it right for her to take the initiative? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to let that man lead? That hesitation lasted barely a second. Oh! Bash suddenly scooped her up into his arms, a perfect princess carry. Among orcs, the norm was to throw women over a shoulder or drag them by the hair, but Bash showed no roughness at all. Her face flushed, Thunder Sonia wrapped her arms around his neck, guided by a vague memory that this was probably the right thing to do. And so, the two of them entered the adjoining room together. Well then, I'll go look for some food, said Zell, standing up. She thought that if they were leaving the ruins the next day, it would be best to prepare something they could carry. Maybe roasting more lizards wouldn't be a bad idea. Wait. Wait a moment. Don't run away. Stay right there. Thunder Sonia came out of the room in less than 5 minutes. Ha! She raised her fist to face level, as if to say I did it, but something was off. Her eyes wide, she pointed alternately at her own arm and the room, opening and closing her mouth, unable to form any words. I knew this would happen. Calm down, it'll go in eventually. Come on, we'll help you a bit. Thunder Sonia, unable to resist, was pushed back inside the room by the two of them. A few minutes later, a heart-rending scream echoed through the ruins. And so, Bash's long journey of chastity finally came to an end. It was as if he were sinking at the bottom of a deep mire. He didn't want to think about anything, nor could he. He was a virgin. That fact had been laid bare. The undeniable proof of his virginity had been exposed, leaving a wound in Bash's heart that would never fade. Yet, it wasn't the fact of being a virgin itself that shamed him. After all, even though he had chased women after the war, during the conflict he had never done so. Bash carried immense pride as an orc hero. But that pride was not something he had been born with. From the moment he could remember, he had been thrown onto the battlefield and had come close to death. Though he managed to survive, his life afterward was one long, desperate struggle fighting with everything he had just to stay alive. In hindsight, perhaps Bash had felt more fear than anyone else. Maybe he had always feared death and fought only to keep it at bay. When other orcs reached the age where their survival instincts and reproductive instincts balanced out, Bash's scales had remained tilted entirely toward the will to survive. Thus, he had lived without ever knowing the joy of lying with a woman. But among orcs, worth was not measured by battle alone, it was also proven through procreation. The one who triumphed in battle and also took a woman was deemed truly strong. That was the essence of the Orcish instinct. Only those who achieved both could feel genuine pride from the depths of their souls. For orcs, the act of raping a woman carried deep significance. That was why, until the war ended, Bash had never known pride. When they began calling him the orc hero, he wondered why him. He never thought he deserved it. He was sure there were many warriors far more worthy. But the orcs around recognized him nonetheless. No one voiced objection. Seeing that, Bash swore to become an orc worthy of the title, a proud star among his kind. He swore to be the orc hero. That was perhaps the very first treasure Bash had ever earned in his life. It wasn't something consumable, like a sword or armor, nor a necessity like shelter or food. It was something not everyone could obtain, a sign that you had done the right thing. That recognition, to Bash, was what the title of orc hero represented. Precisely because of that, his virginity remained a burden on his heart. He did not regret having refrained from raping women during the war, he had never had that luxury. But deep inside, he felt that a virgin orc hero could not truly call himself one with pride. That was why he had tried to cast aside his virginity to protect the honor of the orc hero. Yet even in that, he had failed. The pride of the orc hero was lost. Of course, Bash hadn't thought through all of this in such detail. But without question, he felt a vast emptiness and despair unlike anything before. Everything was over. Following Thunder Sonia had merely been the instinctive urge of an orc desiring a woman. A pretty elf walked ahead of him, hips and ass swaying, and he simply followed. He expected nothing. Bash had already given up on everything. Even if his mark were to disappear, his pride could never return. But things hadn't turned out that way. Bash awoke. His mind was clearer than it had been in the past 10 years. It was as though he had been dreaming, an endless, long dream from which he had finally emerged. Gagat! Agat! When he turned to his right, he saw a naked elf, legs spread open, snoring softly as she used his arm as a pillow. She was the one who had woken him from that long slumber. She had brought him back, slapped him to his senses, and the moment she had given him was nothing short of dazzling. The experience he had yearned for all those years had truly been worthy of the word pleasure, and it had completely dispelled all of Bash's lingering doubts. Bash touched his face. The mark was still there, the symbol of the mage had already been branded upon him. Thunder Sonia had told him it couldn't be erased. But at the same time, she had also told him that he wasn't some kind of magical warrior, but a true orc hero. That he alone was the genuine hero, for that was how the orcs of old had been. To be honest, Bash hadn't understood half of what she said. But Thunder Sonia had done everything she could to cheer him, telling him that he was already fine as he was. Without a doubt, it was that desperation of hers that had managed to awaken him. With this, I can finally boast at the drinking feasts. That was the first thought that came to his mind once it cleared. For an orc, such a thing was important. Even though he was brave, he had always avoided drinking with his own kind, simply because he hated being asked whether he had any experience with women. But now he could. Among Orcish boasts, one of the most common topics at feasts was how loudly the first woman they slept with had screamed. Bash could now tell his story in vivid detail, from the moment he took Thunder Sonia's virginity to the instant he reached his climax. He would never forget a single part of what had happened that night. And when he thought about being able to tell that story over drinks, the mark on his face suddenly felt trivial. If anyone dared mock his mark, he could calmly answer, "But you've never done something like that with the great elf archmage, have you?" And the other would fall silent. After all, orcs were a simple race. "Mogo, Mogo, this meat's hard, did you overcook it?" "Hey? What, it's frozen." When he turned to his left, he saw a familiar human woman sleeping. It was Zell, the former fairy. Her sleep talk was utterly devoid of sensuality, but in bed, the story had been quite different. Bash was an orc. He didn't truly understand what it meant to be loved by a woman. Until then, he had tried to win women over by imitating humans and elves, but he had never been able to imagine what kind of bond came afterward, nor had he experienced it himself. However, perhaps it was something like what he now had with Zell. A relationship that wasn't about dragging a woman home by force to make her bear children. It was something else entirely. The humans, elves worked for it, circled around it, prepared for it carefully, all to reach something like this. And even with two such beauties lying beside him, Bash's little Bash showed no sign of life. He had been thoroughly drained. Suu. He looked down toward his legs. Resting her head on his thigh was the voluptuous succubus, Carrot. Just yesterday she'd worn the expression of someone on the brink of starvation, but now she looked utterly satisfied and content. She had watched Bash's encounters with Thunder Sonia and Zell, occasionally making comments and offering advice. But when he was done with Zell and opened his arms, she had hurled herself straight into his chest. And thus, Bash had been drained of every last drop of strength. He had no choice but to confirm once again that an orc had absolutely no defense against the assault of a succubus. Even so, precisely because he had been completely drained, Bash had entered the true state of a sage. Without a doubt, this was the clearest, most enlightened Bash had ever been in his life. He ought to thank Zell and Carrot as well. Simply having taken the virginity of the famed great elven archmage Thunder Sonia was already a tale worth boasting about. But beyond that, being able to say that he had also lain with a human and a succubus, now that was a story fit for an orc hero. 3 women in a single night, few orcs could ever achieve such a feat. It was something to be proud of before anyone. Even he himself, had he heard of such a story from another, would have envied it, even if that other bore a mark on his face. Fuga. He felt a twitch on his right arm. Turning his head, he met Thunder Sonia's gaze. Yuah! She froze for a few seconds. Then, moving only her eyes, she looked around, and as she remembered what had happened or rather, what she herself had done, she slowly closed the legs she had left carelessly open and covered her chest with her hands. Well, so this is what it's like to wake up using your husband's arm as a pillow? When people used to tell me about it, I thought they were idiots, but it's not so bad, actually. Thunder Sonia murmured this softly, no doubt to avoid waking the other two. So, elves have those kinds of boast tales too. We call that sarcasm or irony, though, now that I think about it, orcs tell plenty of those stories too, don't they? Yeah. I'll brag about last night every time I drink. I'll talk about your cries, how your body moved, and how your sigh slowly turned sweet. Those kinds of things, well, you're an orc, so I suppose I can't complain. Fine, if it's only for boasting, I'll allow it, but let's make one thing clear, I won't let you put a collar on me and parade me around naked, understand? I won't let any other orc besides you see my body. And besides, that sort of thing has a terrible reputation among elves. If word got out that you'd done something like that to me, it could start a war between orcs and elves. I understand. I won't do it. At Bash's honest reply, Thunder Sonia furrowed her brows, pressed her lips together, and fell into thought, muttering under her breath. Well, whatever. Anyway, from now on, you and I are husband and wife. Among elves, monogamy is the norm, but since you're an orc, I'll allow you to have other wives. However, you must truly love me, do you understand? Love me more than any of the others. You do understand, right? Yes, I understand. Do you, really? There was a bit of a pause there, huh? Wah! When Bash moved his right arm and drew Thunder Sonia into his embrace, she immediately fell silent and, whispering, I'll let you get away with that for today, snuggled up against his warm body. In truth, Bash's hesitation came from not knowing what would happen if he returned home with multiple wives. Among orcs, it was common for several males to share a single woman. Yes, the orcs were a polygamous race. Only those who achieved great deeds were allowed to have a wife of their own, and even then, it was always a one-to-one bond. That was why Bash couldn't even imagine what people would say if he came back with 3 women at tow. Even so, by that point, there was no choice but to face it head-on. Bash had absolutely no intention of letting go of his women. If anyone dared to challenge him, he would silence them in a duel. If he lost, they could take the women from him, but losing was not an option he intended to consider. But you know what? I'd also like a proper wedding. I have the right to show off my husband too. Is that true? Of course. You're someone worth showing off. We'll have a grand celebration in my country. You'll dress in your finest, we'll parade through the city, and then you'll declare your love for me before everyone. Understood? I won't take no for an answer. Understood. Wait a second. If you do that for me, then I suppose I'll have to take part in the orc parade too, right? Damn it, I wish I hadn't thought of that. Maybe they'd at least let me keep my underwear. No, if I were you, I wouldn't allow that either. I'd want to show off my husband in all his glory. Damn, but naked? Absolutely not. Between elves and orcs, the difference was only one of form, elves dressed to show off, while orcs showed off by undressing. In the end, both races boasted in their own way. If that's your wish, I'd grant you any request in return. Such as? At her question, Bash pondered for a moment. But this Bash was now a sage, and he quickly found the right words. He remembered something an elf had once told him in the Siwanasai forest. For you, I would fight even a dragon. Coming from you, that doesn't sound like a joke. But no, that's not what I meant. I already said what I want, so now it's your turn, tell me what you want me to do. That would make it fair. Thunder Sonia smiled faintly as she spoke. In truth, she had been thinking about this since the zombie incident in the Siwanasai forest. What would happen if she ever married someone from another race? Every race had its limits, its lines that could or couldn't be crossed. She was an elf, and elves gave themselves completely to their partners, as long as it was within the bounds they could accept. Then, Thunder Sonia made up her mind. She was ready to accept whatever came, as long as it didn't involve parading around naked. She couldn't quite imagine what Bash might ask of her, or perhaps she simply didn't want to imagine it. In her mind echoed the dreadful stories of elf women captured by orcs, condemned to horrific lives of slavery. She knew Bash would never do such a thing, but if what he asked was part of Orcish custom, she was prepared to accept it, at least a little. I want you to bear my children. Oh. The request was direct, simple, and clear. Yet for an orc, that was the most natural and most serious form of a marriage proposal. It marked the one line no orc could compromise. If you were any other orc, you would have said, I'll make you have them by force. Should I have said it that way? No, no. The way you said it now is perfect. The Bash Thunder Sonia knew wasn't the kind of orc who would force a woman to bear his children. And precisely because he wasn't that kind of orc, she didn't turn him away. Good. Then, 3, no, I'll do my best for 5. That day, Bash took Thunder Sonia as his wife. Well, anyway, everything will depend on whether we defeat Gadigas. During the talk after sex, Thunder Sonia had been wearing a satisfied smile, but suddenly her expression hardened. As long as the war doesn't end, there will be no children or anything like that. She had managed to get Bash to join her cause. And, in these circumstances, Carrot would also be an ally. They already had an idea of how to defeat Gadigas. Details still needed investigating, and it would be necessary to organize a large support operation for the succubi within the country, but Thunder Sonia had already made her decision. At least the goal she set when she decided not to return to the Elven lands and to act on her own had been achieved. Suddenly a chill ran over her skin. That sensation, so familiar after countless battles, left no doubt, it was an ambush. Thunder Sonia sat bolt upright. The enemy. Looks like it. What do you want to do, mister? The moment Thunder Sonia perceived it, the other two also snapped awake. The three of them leapt up, dressed quickly, and moved toward the door. Perhaps they had never truly fallen asleep. Their reaction was far too fast. Thinking that they might have overheard their earlier conversation, Thunder Sonia's face flushed red. Hey? Thunder Sonia? Are you okay? Still half asleep? We're surrounded, you know. And no, that's not it. We're surrounded, right? Thunder Sonia regained her composure immediately and reached for the clothes they'd left scattered by the bed. In that instant she realized how long they'd been there, between those sheets. Damn. I planned to leave before Sequence detected us. No problem. Oh really? And what do you plan to do? Fight our way out. Bash said it with that firm, majestic manner he usually had. Such a brilliant idea, Sonia thought, looking around. Although Zell wasn't very strong, they had Bash, Carrot, and herself. Even without weapons, considering they were in a confined space, breaking through seemed possible. She wasn't so sure, however, about escaping a pursuit. Being overtaken by a crowd out on the snowy plain didn't seem promising. But wouldn't it be better to annihilate them all? Did you hear that, mister? As expected of the great elven archmage. Not knowing how many enemies there are, she says annihilate them all, and their demons on top of that. How confident is this woman? Listen, Thunder Sonia. None of us have weapons. Maybe you're fine, but Carrot and I might be left behind depending on how many there are. I know that. Has there ever been an elf in history who, with an air of superiority, lectured orcs? Even if there hadn't been, it didn't matter. Thunder Sonia was precisely the very history. Of course, if you order me to fight, I'll fight to the death. And why would you do that just because I said so? Because you're the commander, aren't you? Was she, really? Thunder Sonia looked at Zell and Carrot, and both nodded. It was true that throughout their journey, she had been the one leading the group. If they called her the commander or leader, it made sense. And yes, Thunder Sonia was a woman capable of taking on that role. I see, so I'm the commander, she murmured, accepting it naturally. Then, speaking firmly, very well, I'll say this once. I don't ever want to see anyone close to me die protecting me again. So don't you dare fight to the death. If you see you can't win, retreat at the best possible moment. Survive, even if it means leaving me behind. She remembered the faces and names of those who had fought for her and died. Especially that last woman, Bougainvillea. Her face was still fresh in her memory. She didn't want to feel that pain again. No matter how many times she had sworn it before and how many times that vow had been broken, she couldn't help but swear it once more. Do you think I'd let the wife I finally got die without trying to protect her? My, those are some lovely words. But you know full well I'm a woman who won't die, even without your protection. I know. But I don't intend to let you die before me. TCH. No matter how hard you try, I'll outlive you either way. Then let's die together on the battlefield. It's a promise. Sonia raised her fist, and Bash, somewhat surprised, did the same. Their fists met with force. Zell, excited, joined in, and Carrot mimicked them too. Friskup, such a cute moment. 1 man and 3 women. Those 4, united by a strange sense of camaraderie, stepped through the door. Sequence had brought 10 subordinates. There were no young ones, nearly all were women, and only 2 were men counting Sequence himself. He had probably come with people capable of resisting Carrot's charm. In theory, there were many demons who could resist a succubus's charm, but Carrot's was particularly powerful. Sequence himself might have been able to resist it, but among the others, that was less certain. It seemed he had gathered people of some ability, yet none of those women looked familiar to Thunder Sonia and the others. If they didn't recognize them, that meant they hadn't stood out much on the battlefield, or perhaps there was simply a shortage of personnel. The best ones were likely marching south under Gadiga's command. Sequence, hey, said Bash the moment he saw his face. Sequence stared at him, then glanced at the women standing protectively before him and nodded. Seems we've interrupted you, Bash. It's fine. We were just finishing. I could sit down for a drink with you now and make you listen to my stories. Sequence narrowed his eyes. That calm, confident demeanor was that of a self-assured orc. He seemed even more confident than the last time they'd met at GE Fortress. It wasn't just confidence he radiated, even though Sequence was skilled at concealing his true feelings, a sense of relief showed through. If we weren't in this place, I'd love to hear them. Drinking with you must taste wonderful. At those words, Bash looked down to his lower left, where Thunder Sonia's head rested. It was as if he were asking, "Can I go out for a drink?" Thunder Sonia replied with her expression, "Absolutely not. We have to go back south to defeat their king. The revelry can come afterward. If we survive, that is. What a shame. I would have loved to hear the story of how you, my enemy Thunder Sonia, were raped." In the end she let out these super pathetic screams. She got frightened right before it even happened, but then she was in Mister's arms in this lovey-dovey pillow talk, you know? I argued in my sleep with my past self about when I should wake up, but we never reached a conclusion. What a perverse woman. I don't need all those details. If you were awake at least say good morning. Thunder Sonia bristled at Zell's explanation. Even Carrot murmured, we didn't want to interrupt, since the moment had been suffused with utter tenderness. Anyway, Sequence. You may have come to finish us off, but it doesn't look like you have enough men, does it? Has Gadigas already recalled the foot soldiers? Not even double the troops would stop us. If it had been only her, perhaps she couldn't have forced her way through. Sequence and the 9 demon with him were all seasoned warriors, older or with some flaw, but each experienced enough to have crossed steel in the past and survived an encounter with Thunder Sonia. They were, therefore, a force capable of bringing her down alone. But Thunder Sonia was no longer alone. Even if they were twice or 3 times as many, they would go through them easily. I know. I brought enough people to handle one of you, and that human over there. Oh? You forgot to count Bash and Carrot among our forces? Is age clouding your sight? That must have been it, Sequence muttered. If Bash has truly returned, we can't win. And we don't have time for a lost battle. So we'll let you go. Bash, what do you think? If you don't let us pass, we'll fight. Perfect. Then let's not say we blocked your way. We won't die in vain. Sequence said that, then calmly stepped aside. The other demon followed suit and opened a path. There was an exit ahead. Though Thunder Sonia thought, what trap is this, she watched Bash walk forward naturally and followed. However, as she passed by Sequence, he spoke to her. Thunder Sonia, Great Elven Archmage. What do you want? I thank you for having saved our benefactor. Now it all made sense. Sequence had never intended to spare Thunder Sonia if she'd been alone. Seeing her with Bash, willing to help him, he granted a truce and chose to observe. And because she helped him, he now let them leave. But it was clear, this mercy would very likely be the last they would be shown. Bash. Next time we may well be enemies. If we meet on the battlefield, I will show no mercy. Fine. If it's you, a demon of renown, you will be a more than worthy rival. If a hero who can repel dragons says that, it gives me goosebumps. We'll meet on the battlefield. Accompanied by the gazes of the demons who allowed them passage, Bash and his group departed. So, where are we going now? Zell asked as they descended the mountain and reached the snowy plain, glancing back toward the snow-covered peaks. You said we were going to defeat Lord Gadigas, right? What did that book say again? Carrot added, keeping the conversation going. Bash didn't seem worried. He was simply following his wife wherever she wished to go. The orc hero was always strongest when he had orders to follow rather than acting on his own. It said there was once a race that, through their own magic, killed an immortal king resurrected by an ancient spell, just like Gadigas. The book didn't specify what kind of magic they used, but their name probably hasn't changed. And what race was that? Thunder Sonia answered firmly. The ogres. Their sorcery was created for that very purpose. Thus, their next destination was decided. He had lost his virginity, gained a wife, and that journey had come to an end. But a new one was beginning, one to defeat Gadigas and bring the war to an end. Arc 9. Elf Country, Thunder Sonia's Arc End. Friskup, alright, folks. We've reached the end of the arc. I've gotta say, at first it felt kinda weak to me, but with these last 2 chapters, well, ever since they got to the ruins, it really picked up. Kinda sad about Bougainvillea's death, though. Didn't see that coming. And I loved the twist with the mark thing. I honestly thought Bash would lose his virginity earlier, but turns out I was wrong. Not that I expected the mark to disappear just from having sex, but I figured it'd go in that direction. Guess I misjudged it. I also find it really funny how the author played with that whole if you hit 30 without doing it, you become a wizard trope, so typically Japanese, but then gave it an entirely new spin. Solid 10 out of 10, seriously. And well, for those of you who only follow Bash, see you in the next arc, whenever that comes out, and for those keeping up with my other translations, see you in the next chapter. I'll probably start releasing new The Unaware Atelier Meister chapters every Monday and Friday.